Hello everyone, and welcome to the Ben 10 What Ifs. So we are back with an interesting movie on what if Ben 10 mastered the Shadow Omnitrix and got Harem of Charmcaster, Ester and Eunice. But before we start, I just want to remind you to please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button if you enjoy my content. Let's start the story. Chapter 1. Shadow's Edge. The dimensional anomaly pulsed above Bellwood like a bruise in the fabric of reality, a swirling vortex of violet and obsidian that tore through the evening sky. Ben Tennyson watched it from the rooftop of an abandoned warehouse, the wind whipping his brown hair as emerald eyes narrowed in assessment. At 21, he'd grown into his lanky teenage frame, shoulders broader and jawline sharper. Beneath the light stubble he hadn't bothered to shave in days. The familiar weight of the Omnitrix pressed against his left wrist, a constant companion through 7 years of universal threats and hard-won victories. "Looks like dinner plans are cancelled again," he muttered, pressing 2 fingers to the communicator in his ear. "Gwen, I'm at the site. Whatever this thing is, it's growing. Any readings from your end?" His cousin's voice crackled through the connection. "The mana signatures are unlike anything I've encountered before. It's as if someone tore a hole between dimensions, but it's selective. Only allowing specific energy patterns through. Selective dimensional breaches. That's a new one." Ben stepped closer to the edge of the roof, calculating the distance to the pulsing anomaly suspended above the city park. "Any idea what's on the other side? That's what worries me. The energies aren't just alien, they're wrong somehow. Kevin and I are still 30 minutes out." Ben glanced at the Omnitrix. Its familiar green glow reassuring against the gathering darkness. "I'll do some recon. If this thing starts dropping interdimensional tourists into downtown Bellwood, we'll want a welcome party ready." "Ben, wait for backup," Gwen insisted, her voice tight with concern. "These readings are setting off every alarm Grandpa Max has. The plumbers are scrambling response teams from 3 sectors." A flash of movement caught Ben's attention, a shadow detaching from the anomaly, streaking toward the earth like a meteor trailing violet flames. It crashed into the center of the park with enough force to shake the ground beneath his feet. "Something just came through," Ben said, already moving toward the fire escape. "I'll check it out and keep my distance. Promise." He didn't wait for her response before scaling down the rusted metal ladder, dropping the last 10 feet to land in a crouch on the cracked asphalt. 7 years of experience had taught him when to see Harjin and when to approach with caution. The empty park stretched before him, once green grass now withered and gray in a perfect circle surrounding the impact site. Ben approached slowly, keeping to the shadows of massive oak trees. The crater smoldered at the center of the dead zone, wisps of violet energy curling upward like spectral fingers. Within the depression lay a single object, small, metallic, and familiar enough to send a chill down his spine. "That's not possible," he whispered, crouching at the crater's edge. The device resembled his own Omnitrix in basic design, but where his glowed emerald green. This one pulsed with deep violet light. Black metal formed its housing instead of white, and the faceplate displayed alien silhouettes he'd never encountered, twisted, predator. Y forms that seemed to shift and writhe when viewed from the corner of his eye. Ben's communicator crackled. "Ben, your biometrics just spiked. What are you seeing?" "It's an Omnitrix," he replied, voice barely above a whisper. "Or something designed to look like one. Different color scheme, definitely not Azimuth's work." "Don't touch it," Gwen warned. "We don't know." Her voice dissolved into static as the anomaly above pulsed brighter. The air grew heavy, charged with potential energy that raised the hair on Ben's arms. The Shadow Omnitrix responded, its violet light intensifying as it rose from the crater. Hovering at eye level, years of instinct screamed at Ben to retreat, to transform and put distance between himself and this unknown technology. But something else, a pull he could NT explain, kept him rooted to the spot as the device slowly rotated, scanning him with a thin beam of purple light. "Genetic signature recognized," announced a voice like shattered glass being ground underfoot. "Benjamin Tennyson of Timeline Prime. Compatibility confirmed." Before Ben could react, the device shot forward, clamping around his right wrist, opposite his original Omnitrix. Pain lance ate up his arm as the metal housing seemed to melt, sending tendrils beneath his skin that burned like liquid nitrogen. He fell to his knees, a scream torn from his throat as the 2 devices reacted to each other. Green and violet energy arced between them, creating a feedback loop that intensified until both Omnitrixes released simultaneous pulses of blinding light. When the energy dissipated, Ben found himself staring at a single device on his left wrist, his familiar Omnitrix, but altered. The housing remained white but was now veined with lines of black metal that shifted like living shadows. The faceplate alternated between green and violet as if the two power sources were battling for dominance. What the hell? Ben gasped, struggling to his feet as the device settled into an uneasy equilibrium. The faceplate now a swirl of emerald and violet, the alien silhouettes a mixture of his familiar transformations and the twisted new forms. The dimensional anomaly above contracted suddenly, collapsing inward with a thunderous boom that shook the earth. As it closed, a final pulse of energy washed over the park, and Ben felt something else push through, a presence, vast and ancient, it seemed to reach out specifically to him. "I have found you at last, Benjamin Tennyson," whispered a voice directly into his mind. "The Shadow Omnitrix has chosen well. We shall meet soon enough." The presence withdrew as quickly as it had arrived, leaving Ben alone in the darkened park with the merged device on his wrist. He stared at it, watching the colors swirl and blend before temporarily settling on his familiar green interface. Ben, come in." Gwen's voice finally broke through the static. "I'm here," he responded, voice hoarse. "But we've got a serious problem. The device, it merged with the Omnitrix." "What? How is that possible? What's happening?" Ben watched as the faceplate flickered violet before returning to green. "I don't know, but," his words cut off as a wave of dizziness washed over him. Images flashed through his mind. Alien worlds burning, civilizations falling before a tide of darkness, and at the center of it all, a figure wearing an Omnitrix that pulsed with violet light. "Ben," Gwen's voice seemed distant now. "Your vitals are all over the place. We're coming as fast as we can." "Something's wrong," he managed, stumbling toward a nearby bench. "The Omnitrix is changing. I can feel it trying to." Another wave of dizziness hit, stronger this time. Ben collapsed onto the bench, clutching his head as more visions assaulted him, twisted versions of his alien forms. More powerful but corrupted, fueled by the violet energy now coursing through the device. The Omnitrix suddenly activated on its own, the selection dial spinning wildly or settling on a silhouette he recognized, Heatblast. Before he could react, the transformation sequence began, but something felt fundamentally wrong. The familiar rush of genetic reconfiguration was tainted, as if something else was being added to the mix. When the green light faded, Ben looked down at hands that should have been composed of molten rock and flame. Instead, he saw limbs formed obsidian glass that cracked with each movement, revealing not orange magma but deep violet energy that leaked out like blood from a wound. He could feel the power surging through this new form, far beyond what his normal Heatblast transformation offered. "What am I?" he whispered, his voice a resonant rumble that caused nearby windows to vibrate. The answer came not from without but within, Ullage flooding into his consciousness directly from the altered Omnitrix. This was Shadow Heatblast, a version of the Pyronite species from a dimension where their sun had collapsed into a black hole, forcing the race to evolve to harness dark energy instead of flame. The power was intoxicating. Ben felt he could level mountains with a gesture, boil oceans with a thought. And part of him, a dark, primal part he rarely acknowledged, wanted to do exactly that, just to witness the destruction he could cause. "No," he growled, forcing the urge down. "This isn't me." With effort, he focused on reverting to human form. But the transformation seemed reluctant to release him. When it finally did, the process left him gasping on his hands and knees, a residual violet energy crackling across his skin before fading away. He struggled to find words for what he'd experienced. Dangerous. The sound of footsteps on gravel alerted him to someone's approach. Ben rose quickly, ready to activate the Omnitrix again despite the risks, then froze as he recognized the figure emerging from the shadows. "Hope," he said, using Charmcaster's real name rather than her alias. The silver eye-red sorceress stepped into the moonlight, her appearance markedly different from their last encounter years before. Gone was the gothic punk aesthetic, replaced by a more practical outfit, dark purple combat pants, a fitted black top, and a short jacket adorned with arcane symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. Her eyes, still a striking violet that now matched the energy pulsing in Ben's Omnitrix, assessed him with cautious concern. "Tennyson," she acknowledged, approaching slowly with her hands visible and empty of the magical artifacts she typically wielded. "I felt the dimensional breach from 3 states away. This isn't a coincidence." Ben tensed, memories of their antagonistic history flashing through his mind. "Last I heard, you were in containment after that business with Adwaita." A flicker of something, regret, perhaps, crossed her features. "That was 2 years ago. I've been working with the plumbers since then." Probationary consultant. Her gaze dropped to his wrist, widening at the sight of the altered Omnitrix. "So it found you. You know what this is?" Ben demanded, taking a step forward. Charmcaster nodded, maintaining her distance. "The Shadow Omnitrix. There are legends about it in certain magical circles, a counterpart to Azimuth's creation, containing DNA samples from the darkest, most dangerous species across the multiverse. Who made it? No one knows for certain. Some say it was Azimuth himself from an alternate timeline where he embraced conquest instead of knowledge. Others believe it formed naturally, a response to the original Omnitrix, creating an imbalance in the multiverse." She gestured to his wrist. "But the fact that it sought you out specifically is troubling." Ben looked down at the device, watching as it cycled between green and violet. "It said something about compatibility before it attached itself. Then it merged with my Omnitrix." Charmcaster's expression grew grave. "That's not supposed to happen. The legend said the Shadow Omnitrix would seek a worthy wielder, but merging with an existing Omnitrix." She trailed off, eyes unfocused as she processed this information. "I just transformed into some dark version of Heatblast," Ben continued. "The power was unlike anything I've experienced, but it came with urges. Destructive ones. The Shadow Omnitrix doesn't just transform your body," Charmcaster explained, taking a cautious step closer. "It transforms your mind, pushing you toward the natural instincts of these shadow species. If you're not careful, it will corrupt you completely." A chill ran down Ben's spine. "How do you know all this?" Charmcaster hesitated, then reached into her pocket and withdrew a small, ancient-looking book bound in what appeared to be black metal. "Because they've been tracking interdimensional anomalies for the plumbers, looking for signs that the legends were true." She held up the book. "This contains everything I've learned about the Shadow Omnitrix and its creator." "And who is that creator?" Ben asked, feeling the device on his wrist pulse in response to the book's presence. "He's called Lord Umbra," Charmcaster replied. "A conqueror who travels between dimensions, subjugating worlds with powers similar to what you just experienced. And if the Shadow Omnitrix has appeared here, it means he won't be far behind." Before Ben could respond, the merged Omnitrix suddenly activated, cycling rapidly through alien forms before settling on a silhouette he didn't recognize. Violet energy crawled up his arm like living vines, and pain lanced through his body as the device attempted to force a transformation. "It's trying to take control," he gasped, clutching his wrist as he fought against the transformation. "I can't." Charmcaster moved with surprising speed, grabbing his arm and pressing her palm against the Omnitrix. Violet magic flowed from her fingers, meeting the energy from the device in a contest of wills that sent sparks flying between them. "Fight it, Tennyson," she commanded, her eyes glowing with magical power. "This is your body, your mind. The Omnitrix responds to your willpower, that hasn't changed." Ben gritted his teeth, focusing on pushing back against the foreign presence he could feel attempting to override his consciousness. With Charmcaster's magic creating a buffer, he managed to assert control, forcing the device to power down. As the violet energy receded, Ben sagged forward, catching himself on Charmcaster's shoulders. They stayed like that for a moment, both breathing heavily from the exertion. "Thanks," he said quietly, straightening up. "How did you do that?" Charmcaster stepped back, looking almost embarrassed by the momentary proximity. "I've spent years studying the intersection of technology and magic. Your Omnitrix has always existed in that space, Galvan science so advanced it might as well be magical. The Shadow Omnitrix is the same, but it draws power from darker dimensions." She gestured to his wrist again. "What I did was temporary. The merge is complete. I can't separate them without killing you in the process." But I can teach you magical disciplines to help control it, if you'll let me. Ben studied her face, looking for any sign of the manipulative sorceress who had tried to kill him and his friends multiple times in the past. Instead, he saw only genuine concern, a weariness that spoke of her own difficult journey. "Why would you help me?" he asked bluntly. A bitter smile touched her lips. "Because I know what it's like to be corrupted by power that promises everything but takes more than you're willing to give." She held up her hands, small scars visible across her palms. "These are from the magical bindings the plumbers used when I surrendered myself. 2 years of rehabilitation, working with Gwen and Grandmaster Hex to undo the damage I'd done to myself." She met his gaze directly. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Tennyson. But right now, you're facing the same darkness I did, and I'm one of the few people who might actually be able to help." Before Ben could respond, his communicator crackled to life. "Ben, we're 5 minutes out," came Gwen's voice. "Plumber teams are converging on your location. Are you stable?" Ben looked at the altered Omnitrix, then at Charmcaster. "For now, I've got unexpected backup." "What does that mean?" Kevin's voice cut in, suspicion evident even through the static. "It means I ran into Charmcaster. She has information about what's happening." There was a moment of silence before Gwen responded, her tone carefully neutral. "Hope is consulting with us on this case. She detected the anomaly yesterday and warned us it might be connected to something called the Shadow Omnitrix." "Yeah, well, she was right," Ben confirmed. "It found me, and now it's merged with my Omnitrix. I'm looking at a whole new set of problems." "We'll be there soon," Gwen assured him. "Don't try any transformations until we can get you to a containment facility." The communicator went silent, and Ben turned back to Charmcaster with raised eyebrows. "You're working with Gwen now. Last I checked, you two weren't exactly friendship bracelet material." A genuine laugh escaped her, brief but surprisingly warm. "We have our moments. Your cousin is formidable. We respect each other's abilities, even if we'll never be close." She gestured to the altered Omnitrix. "May I?" Ben hesitated, then extended his arm. Charmcaster examined the device without touching it, muttering words in an arcane language that made the air shimmer around them. "The merger is still stabilizing," she observed. "That's both good and bad news. Good because it means your original Omnitrix is fighting to maintain its primary function. Bad because the conflict between the two systems could cause unpredictable effects. Like transforming me into shadow versions of my aliens." She nodded. "Among other things, the Shadow Omnitrix contains species your device never had access to, predators so dangerous even Azimuth wouldn't include them in his catalog." Ben felt the weight of this new reality settling on his shoulders. "So they got a cosmic weapons upgrade that might turn me into the next interdimensional threat." "Perfect. It's not inevitable," Charmcaster countered. "The Shadow Omnitrix bonds with those who have the potential to master it without being consumed by it. There's a reason it sought you specifically. My charming personality." The corner of her mouth quirked upward. "Your experience with the original Omnitrix. Your moral compass. Perhaps even your annoying stubbornness." She became serious again. "But those same qualities make you dangerous to Lord Umbra. If you can master the Shadow Omnitrix rather than letting it master you, you'd be the most significant threat to his plans." "And what exactly are his plans?" Ben asked, feeling the device pulse against his skin as if responding to the name. Charmcaster opened the black metal book, turning to a page covered in arcane symbols and diagrams. "Convergence. He travels between dimensions, seeking those with the right energetic signatures, and D then uses the power of the Shadow Omnitrix to merge them together, creating pocket universes under his complete control." She turned another page, revealing an illustration of a massive being shrouded in darkness, with only glowing violet eyes visible within the void. Each merger makes him stronger, adding the unique energies of those dimensions to his own power. If he reaches our universe and finds you've bonded with the Shadow Omnitrix, he'll either try to take it from me or recruit me, Ben finished, understanding the implications. "Most likely both," Charmcaster confirmed, closing the book. "The book says he can be persuasive. He doesn't just offer power, he offers understanding, acceptance of the darkness within all of us." The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted their conversation. Plumber transport units. their engines humming with the distinctive sound of advanced technology. Ben and Charmcaster turned to watch as 3 armored transports pulled up at the park's entrance. Disgorging teams of agents in full tactical gear. Gwen and Kevin emerged from the lead vehicle, moving quickly toward them. Gwen's expression shifted from concern for Ben to cautious acknowledgement of Charmcaster. While Kevin maintained a wary distance, his hand hovering near a piece of metal attached to his belt, ready to absorb it if necessary. Ben, Gwen called, red hair whipping in the evening breeze as she approached. At 21, she carried herself with the confidence of both a seasoned plumber agent and a master magician, her movements graceful yet purposeful. "Are you all right?" "Define, all right," Ben replied, raising his wrist to show her the altered Omnitrix. "I've got upgraded hardware with some serious strings attached." Gwen's eyes widened as she examined the device, her hand glowing with mana as she passed it over the surface. "The energy patterns are fighting each other. I can sense them." "That tracks with what Hope was telling me," Ben said, no tea. Ching Kevin's surprise at his use of Charmcaster's real name. The 2 Omnitrixes are merged but not integrated. They're competing for control. Kevin finally stepped forward, curiosity overcoming caution. "Can you still transform? Or is it stuck in some kind of reset mode?" "I can transform," Ben confirmed grimly. "But not into anything familiar. I tried Heat Blast and got some Shadow version instead. Nearly lost control of myself in the process." "The Shadow Omnitrix influences the wielder's mind," Charmcaster explained, addressing Gwen rather than Kevin. "It pushes toward aggression, domination, the baser instincts of predator species." Gwen nodded, familiar with the concept. Like Ghost Freak's consciousness trying to overtake Ben's, but built into the device itself. She turned to her cousin with concern. "We need to get you to the containment facility. Grandpa Max has assembled a team to study this." Ben felt the Omnitrix pulse against his wrist, and with it came a wave of reluctance, almost possessiveness, that didn't feel entirely like his own emotion. "I don't think containment is the answer. If this Lord Umbra is coming for the Shadow Omnitrix, putting me in a plumber facility just makes their job a target." "You're not thinking clearly," Kevin argued. "That thing is already getting in your head." "No, he's right," Charmcaster interjected, earning a suspicious glare from Kevin. "The Shadow Omnitrix can't be contained by conventional means. It would just tear through your barriers, potentially hurting anyone nearby in the process." She held up the black book. "We need to understand it better before we try to control it." Gwen eyed the book with interest. "Is that written in Archimata script? Where did you find it?" "Legerdemain, before the realm collapsed. It belonged to an oracle who foresaw the Shadow Omnitrix's creation centuries ago." Charmcaster passed the book to Gwen, who handled it with the reverence of someone who understood its value. "The text is incomplete, but it contains rituals that might help stabilize the merger." While the 2 magic users examined the book, Ben turned to Kevin. "Any word from Azimuth? If anyone knows about this thing, it would be him." Kevin shook his head. "Comms to Galvan Prime are down. There's some kind of interference affecting the entire sector. Started right around the time your new accessory showed up." "That's not a coincidence," Ben muttered, looking up at the night sky where the dimensional anomaly had been. "If this Lord Umbra is as powerful as the book suggests, he might be isolating Earth on purpose." A plumber agent approached, saluting sharply. "Sir, we've established a perimeter and scanned the impact site. There's residual energy but no immediate threat detected. What are your orders?" Ben blinked, still unused to being addressed so formally despite his years of service. "Maintain the perimeter and keep civilians away. This energy could have unpredictable effects on normal humans." As the agent nodded and returned to his post, Ben caught Charmcaster watching him with an unreadable expression. "What?" "Nothing," she said, the ghost of a smile touching her lips. "Just not a sigh. How much you've changed since we first met. You almost sound like you know what you're doing now." "I fake it convincingly," Ben replied with a self-deprecating shrug. 7 years of saving the world teaches you a few things." Gwen rejoined them, the black book tucked carefully under her arm. "The containment team is ready, but I agree with Hope and Ben. Standard procedures won't work here. We need a secure location where Ben can learn to control these new transformations without endangering others." "I might have a place," Charmcaster offered hesitantly. An abandoned Archimata temple in the Nevada desert. It's warded against detection, magical and technological. I've been using it as a safe house during my probation. Kevin scoffed. And we're supposed to just trust that it's not a trap. It's not, Gwen said with surprising certainty. I've been there. It's where Hope surrendered herself to the plumbers 2 years ago. She met Charmcaster's eyes briefly, an unspoken history passing between them. The wards are legitimate, and they might help contain the Shadow Omnitrix's energy while Ben learns to control it. Ben looked between the three of them, feeling the weight of the decision. The Omnitrix pulsed against his wrist, alternating between violet and green as if expressing its own conflicted nature. Nevada it is, he decided. But we keep the plumbers in the loop. I want regular check-ins and a response team on standby in case things go sideways. Gwen nodded, already pulling out her plumber badge to make the arrangements. Kevin looked unconvinced but didn't argue further, moving instead to secure transportation. Left momentarily alone with Charmcaster, Ben studied the sorceress with new eyes. 2 years with the plumbers. Working with Gwen. Offering your secret hideout. You've really changed, haven't you? Charmcaster's expression remained neutral, but something vulnerable flashed in her eyes. We all have our turning points, Tennyson. Mine came when I realized conquest and power hadn't filled the emptiness I thought they would. She glanced at his altered Omnitrix. You're standing at your own crossroads now. The Shadow Omnitrix will offer you power beyond imagination. And part of you, maybe a part you don't like to acknowledge, will want to take it. Ben felt a chill at her words, recognizing the truth in them. How do you resist that kind of temptation? For the first time since her arrival, Charmcaster's composure cracked, revealing a genuine smile that transformed her features. You remember what you're fighting for. And you, sir, surround yourself with people who will knock some sense into you when you forget. She nodded toward Gwen and Kevin. You've got a head start on me there. Before Ben could respond, the altered Omnitrix activated suddenly, its faceplate spinning wildly before settling on an alien silhouette he didn't recognize. Pain shot up his arm as violet energy crawled across his skin. Not again, he gasped, CL, touching his wrist as he fought against the unwanted transformation. Charmcaster moved without hesitation, grasping his arm and channeling her magic into the device. This time, Gwen rushed to join them, adding her own mana to the effort. The combined magical energy created a barrier around the Omnitrix, temporarily suppressing its function. It's getting stronger, Charmcaster observed, maintaining her grip on Ben's arm. The Shadow Omnitrix is integrating faster than I expected. What triggered it? Gwen asked, her brow furrowed in concentration as she reinforced the magical barrier. Ben closed his eyes, focusing on the sensations flowing from the device. It's responding to something, a presence. He opened his eyes, looking toward the sky. He's watching us, as if in response to his words. The night air shimmered 20 feet away, coalescing into a translucent projection of a figure shrouded in darkness. Only its eyes were clearly visible, glowing violet orbs that matched the pulsing energy of the Shadow Omnitrix. Benjamin Tennyson, the figure spoke, its voice resonating with the same shattered glass quality Ben had heard from the Shadow Omnitrix earlier. At last we meet, though only in projection for now. Plumber agents immediately surrounded the figure, weapons drawn, but their energy blasts passed harmlessly through the holographic image. Lord Umbra, I presume, Ben said, stepping forward despite Gwen and Charmcaster's attempts to hold him back. The altered Omnitrix pulsed in time with the figure's eyes, the pain in his arm intensifying. You recognize me. Good. The figure gestured toward Ben's wrist. I see my gift has found its intended recipient. How does it feel to touch true power, young hero? Ben managed a cocky smile despite the pain. I've had better presents. At least gift cards let me choose what I want. A sound like grinding stone emerged from the figure, a laugh, Ben realized. Your reputation for humor precedes you. As does your stubbornness. The projection moved closer, examining Ben with those unsettling violet eyes. But the Shadow Omnitrix cannot be removed, cannot be rejected. It has chosen you as worthy, just as I knew it would. What do you want? Gwen demanded, stepping beside her cousin, hands glowing with mana. The figure turned its attention to her. Gwendolyn Tennyson, the sorceress of this timeline. And its gaze shifted to Charmcaster. Hope Silverman, How interesting to find you among the heroes. In most timelines, you remain firmly on the path of darkness. Charmcaster stiffened at the use of her full name, but maintained her composure. You've been to other dimensions where we exist. I have visited thousands of realities, witnessed countless variations of your lives, Lord Umbra confirmed. In some, Benjamin Tennyson is the greatest hero of his age. In others, the greatest conqueror. The difference is often merely opportunity. If you're here to recruit me, save your breath, Ben said, straightening despite the pain radiating from the Omnitrix. I've turned down better offers from worse monsters. Lord Umbra's projection flickered, as if amused. I am not here to recruit you, Benjamin. I am here to prepare you. He gestured to the altered Omnitrix. The Shadow Omnitrix is more than a tool, it is a key. It opens doorways between dimensions, allowing the wielder to draw power from across the multiverse. To fuel your convergence, Ben concluded, remembering what Charmcaster had told him. Precisely. But such power requires conditioning. The human mind is fragile, easily overwhelmed by the perspectives of beings far beyond your comprehension. The projection moved closer, now only feet away from Ben. The Shadow Omnitrix will transform you gradually, preparing your consciousness to perceive the multiverse as I do. And if I refuse this conditioning? Ben challenged. Lord Umbra's eyes narrowed. Then the device will tear your mind apart as it attempts to fulfill its function. Your identity will fragment, replaced by the consciousness of whichever transformation currently holds sway. The projection's voice softened to something almost like concern. I do not wish that fate upon you, Benjamin. You have potential far beyond the limited role your timeline has cast for you. Before Ben could respond, the altered Omnitrix pulsed violently, the pain suddenly vanishing as the device stabilized into a new configuration, the faceplate now displaying a perfect balance of green and violet, swirling together in a yin-yang pattern. Ah, Lord Umbra observed. The first integration is complete. Your journey begins in earnest now. The projection began to fade, his final words echoing across the park. We will meet again soon, Benjamin Tennyson. Use this time wisely. Learn to master the Shadow Omnitrix before it masters you. As the projection disappeared completely, Ben looked down at the altered device on his wrist. The pain had subsided, CED by an unsettling warmth that spread up his arm and across his chest. That was dramatic, Kevin commented, rejoining them after coordinating with the plumber agents. Evil overlord with a flair for theatrics. Why can't we ever get the subtle ones? Because subtle ones don't announce their plans before attacking, Gwen replied dryly. Which means he's confident enough that he doesn't care if we know what's coming. Charmcaster was staring at the spot where the projection had stood, her expression troubled. He knew my full name. No one knows that except, she cut herself off, shaking her head. He's been watching us across multiple dimensions, learning our strengths, our weaknesses, our histories. All the more reason to get moving, Ben said, examining the newly stabilized Omnitrix. If he can project himself here, he can probably find us anywhere that isn't specifically warded against interdimensional surveillance. The temple in Nevada has those wards, Charmcaster confirmed. It was designed to hide practitioners from entities that exist between dimensions. Kevin jingled a set of keys. Transport's ready when you are. I've got a modified rust bucket parked 2 blocks over, off the plumber grid. Just in case your new fan club is tapping their communications. Ben nodded appreciatively. Always thinking, Levin. One of us has to, Kevin replied with a smirk, Bu. The concern in his eyes betrayed his casual tone. As they prepared to leave, Gwen pulled Ben aside, her voice low. Are you sure about this? Working with hope, going off-grid? Not even a little bit, Ben admitted. But I don't see a better option. Standard plumber protocols weren't designed for interdimensional conquerors with custom Omnitrixes. He glanced at Charmcaster, who was discussing something with Kevin by the park entrance. Do you trust her? Gwen followed his gaze, her expression softening slightly. I trust that she's trying to redeem herself. Whether she succeeds, she shrugged. But right now, her knowledge of magical dimensions and artifacts makes her our best resource for understanding what you're facing. Ben nodded, accepting her assessment. And what about you? You're putting your plumber career on the line by going off protocol. A smile touched Gwen's lips. Please, I'm a Tennyson. Going off protocol is practically a family tradition. Her expression grew serious again. Besides, you'd do the same for me. Without hesitation, Ben confirmed, bumping her shoulder affectionately. As they walked toward the park entrance, the altered Omnitrix pulsed once more, but instead of pain. Ben felt a strange sensation, as if the device was settling into his nervous system, becoming an extension of himself in a way the original Omnitrix never had. Along with this sensation came knowledge, understanding of the new aliens now available to him, their abilities, their weaknesses, and the dangers they posed to his human consciousness. "You okay?" Gwen asked, noticing his momentary distraction. "Yeah," Ben replied slowly. "I think the Omnitrix is communicating with me differently than before." He flexed his wrist, watching as the swirling green and violet pattern shifted in response to his movement. "It's like it's trying to help me understand its functions. Are conditioning you, like Umbra said," Gwen pointed out warily. "Maybe both," Ben conceded. "But if I'm going to master this thing, I need to understand it." Starting with these new transformations, they reached the modified rust bucket, a larger, more advanced version of Grandpa Max's original RV. Outfitted with plumber technology but disguised as an ordinary recreational vehicle, Kevin had already started the engine, while Charmcaster stood by the door, her expression guarded as she watched their approach. "I've informed Max about our plans," Gwen told Ben as they reached the vehicle. "He's not happy about us going off-grid, but he understands the necessity. He's arranging for a plumber-safe house to be established 20 miles from the temple, close enough to respond if needed, far enough to avoid detection." "Grandpa Max," Ben said with a fond shake of his head. "Always 3 steps ahead." As they boarded the rust bucket, Ben caught Charmcaster watching him with that same unreadable expression from earlier. "Something on your mind?" he asked. She hesitated, then spoke quietly enough that only he could hear. "Umbra said I remain on the path of darkness in most timelines. It makes me wonder what's different about this one." The question hung between them, heavy with implications about fate, choice, and redemption. Ben considered his answer carefully, aware that his response mattered more than casual conversation would warrant. "Maybe nothing's different about the timeline," he finally replied. "Maybe it's just different choices." Something shifted in Charmcaster's expression, a slight easing of tension, perhaps, or acknowledgement of a shared understanding. She nodded once before taking a seat near the front of the vehicle, opening the black metal book to continue her research. As the rust bucket pulled away from the park, Ben looked down at the altered Omnitrix once more. The swirling pattern of green and violet light cast shifting shadows across his face, a physical manifestation of the choice now before him, to control this new power or be controlled by it. "Different choices," he murmured to himself, remembering Lord Umbra's words about other timelines where he had become a conqueror rather than a hero. The thought was both chilling and, in some deeply buried part of his consciousness, almost enticing. That enticing whisper was precisely what worried him most. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly beneath the night sky, a sea of sand and stone illuminated by starlight. The modified rust bucket navigated the rugged terrain with ease, its enhanced suspension absorbing the impact of rocks and dips that would have crippled a standard vehicle. Inside, a tense silence had settled over the passengers, each lost in their own thoughts as they approached their destination. Ben sat alone at the rear of the vehicle, deliberately distancing himself from the others as he examined the altered Omnitrix. The device continued its hypnotic swirl of green and violet, occasionally pulsing as if alive and aware of his scrutiny. Every pull, sent information flooding into his mind, glimpses of alien worlds shrouded in shadow, species evolved for environments so hostile they defied human comprehension, and powers that went beyond anything his original transformations had offered. "You should try to sleep," came Charmcaster's voice, startling him from his thoughts. She stood in the aisle a few feet away, respecting his self-imposed isolation while clearly concerned by it. "We've got another hour before we reach the temple." Ben shook his head. "Sleep doesn't feel like an option right now. Every time I close my eyes, I see." He trailed off, unsure how to describe the visions. "Other worlds," Charmcaster finished for him, understanding in her voice. "Possibilities. Versions of yourself you've never encountered." He looked up at her, surprised. "How did you know?" Quote, Because magic works the same way, she explained, taking a seat across from him. When I first connected to the source of my power, I experienced similar visions, glimpses of other timelines. Other versions of myself. It's how dimensions communicate with our consciousness, preparing us to channel energies beyond our normal perception. Ben flexed his wrist, watching as the Omnitrix responded to his movement. It's like it's trying to tell me something, but I can't quite understand the language yet. Charmcaster nodded, her expression thoughtful. Archimata texts describe this as dimensional resonance, when an artifact from one reality attempts to integrate with another. Your original Omnitrix was calibrated specifically for this dimension, but the Shadow Omnitrix. She gestured to the device. It exists partially outside our reality, drawing power from the spaces between dimensions. Which explains why it can access alien DNA that Azimuth never collected, Ben concluded. The pieces beginning to fit together. These shadow versions aren't just darker variants, they're from entirely different evolutionary paths. Precisely. Charmcaster leaned forward, her voice taking on the quality of a teacher explaining a complex concept. Think of dimensions as overlapping layers of possibility. Each layer contains species that evolved along different lines, responding to different environmental pressures, developing different survival mechanisms. And the Shadow Omnitrix lets me access those layers, Ben mused, looking at the device with new understanding. That's why the transformations feel so different. They're not just changing my body, they're changing how I perceive reality itself. A small smile touched Charmcaster's lips. You understand more quickly than I expected, Tennyson. Maybe there's hope for you yet. High praise coming from Hope herself, Ben replied, returning the smile with a tired one of his own. The moment of connection was interrupted as the rust bucket hit a particularly rough patch of terrain, jostling its passengers. From the front, Kevin's voice called back, entering the outer ward perimeter. Things might get weird for a minute. As if on cue, the air inside the vehicle seemed to thicken, pressure building against Ben's eardrums as they passed through the first magical barrier protecting Charmcaster's sanctuary. The altered Omnitrix reacted immediately, pulsing rapidly as violet energy crackled across its surface. What's happening? Ben asked, wincing as the device grew uncomfortably warm against his skin. The wards are detecting the Shadow Omnitrix's extra-dimensional energy, Charmcaster explained, already moving to the front of the vehicle. I need to modify them to let us pass safely. Ben watched as she pressed her palms against the rust bucket's windshield, chanting in an arcane language that made the air shimmer around her. Violet magic, similar in color to the RGY from the Shadow Omnitrix but fundamentally different in nature, flowed from her hands, spreading outward to interact with the invisible barriers surrounding them. The pressure increased momentarily, then released with an almost audible pop as the wards recognized Charmcaster's magical signature and adjusted to allow their passage. The altered Omnitrix settled as well, its pulsing slowing to a steady rhythm once more. Nice work, Gwen commented, genuine respect in her voice as Charmcaster returned to her seat. The outer wards are just the beginning, Charmcaster replied, a hint of pride evident despite her attempt at nonchalance. The temple itself has 7 layers of protection, each designed to block a different type of extra-dimensional detection. Kevin guided the rust bucket around a massive rock formation, revealing their destination in the valley below, an ancient structure built directly into the face of a red stone cliff, its architecture unlike anything Ben had seen on Earth. Angular columns supported a facade carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles, while the entrance was marked by a massive circular doorway inscribed with concentric rings of arcane text. Welcome to the Temple of Ashmedai, Charmcaster announced as Kevin brought the vehicle to a stop at the base of a winding path leading up to the entrance. One of the few Archimata sites on Earth that predates human civilization. Who built it? Ben asked, feeling the altered Omnitrix respond to the temple's presence with a curious warmth. No one knows for certain, Charmcaster replied, gathering her belongings as they prepared to disembark. The Archimata texts claim it was constructed by beings who existed between dimensions, watchers who monitored boundaries between realities to prevent unauthorized crossings. Like interdimensional border patrol, Kevin commented, shutting down the rust bucket's systems. Guess they didn't do a great job if this Umbra guy is dimension hopping. Or perhaps that's exactly why the temple was abandoned, Charmcaster countered, leading them toward the path. The Watchers may have been the first casualties in Umbra's conquest. As they approached the temple entrance, Ben felt the altered Omnitrix growing warmer against his skin, not painful, but definitely responsive to their surroundings. The circular doorway loomed above them, easily 20 feet in diameter and carved from a material that resembled stone but gleamed with an inner light when touched by the pre-dawn illumination. Charmcaster Place. Her palm against a specific symbol near the center of the door, channeling her magic into the ancient mechanism. The concentric rings began to rotate in alternating directions, aligning symbols in patterns that appeared momentarily before shifting into new configurations. With a final pulse of violet energy from Charmcaster's hand, the massive door slid open, revealing a cavernous interior space illuminated by floating orbs of soft, ambient light. "Home sweet home," she said, gesturing for them to enter. "At least for the duration of our interdimensional crisis." The interior of the temple defied its external appearance, stretching far deeper into the cliff face than seemed physically possible. The main chamber rose 3 stories high, with balconies and walkways circling the perimeter at various levels. Bookshelves lined much of the wall space, filled with ancient tomes and scrolls. At the center of the chamber stood a circular platform inscribed with the same shifting symbols as the entrance, surrounding a shallow basin filled with what appeared to be liquid silver. "This is not what I expected," Gwen admitted, her voice hushed with wonder as she took in the surroundings. Even Kevin looked impressed, reaching out to touch one of the floating light orbs only to have it drift playfully away from his fingers. "The temple adapts to the needs of its occupants," Charmcaster explained, setting down her bag on a nearby table that seemed to have appeared specifically for that purpose. "The Archimada designed it as both a sanctuary and a research facility. When I claimed it 2 years ago, it reconfigured itself to support my magical studies. And now," Ben asked, feeling the altered Omnitrix pulse in time with the ambient energy of the space. Charmcaster gestured to the central platform. "Now it senses the shadow Omnitrix and is preparing accordingly. That basin is called the Mirror of Worlds. It can show glimpses of other dimensions when activated properly. Hitch might help us understand what we're dealing with," Gwen concluded, already moving toward the platform with scholarly interest. As the others explored the chamber, Ben found himself drawn to a specific section of bookshelves where several volumes seemed to emit a faint violet glow similar to the energy of the shadow Omnitrix. When he approached, one book in particular, bound in what appeared to be the same black metal as Charmcaster's smaller volume, pulsed in recognition. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you," Charmcaster warned, suddenly beside him. "That's the Lexicon of Shadows, a compendium of entities that exist between dimensions. Some of the entries are psychically linked to the beings they describe." Ben withdrew his hand, but the altered Omnitrix pulsed more insistently, as if responding to the book's presence. "I think it wants me to look at it." Charmcaster studied him for a moment, then nodded. "The shadow Omnitrix is guiding you toward information it deems relevant. That's actually a good sign. It means the device is trying to help you understand its nature rather than simply override your consciousness." With cautious movements, she removed the book from the shelf, placing it on a nearby reading stand. The cover bore no title, only an intricate pattern of interconnected circles that shifted and rearranged themselves as they watched. "Let me check it for traps first," she said, passing her hands over the volume while muttering incantations. Satisfied after a moment, she carefully opened the cover. The pages within were filled with text in a language Ben couldn't read, characters that seemed to move subtly, as if alive. Illustrations accompanied the text, depicting beings of such strange configuration that looking at them for too long made his eyes water. Despite not understanding the language, Ben felt knowledge flowing into his mind as he gazed at the pages, impressions and concepts rather than direct translations. "It's communicating with you through the shadow Omnitrix," Charmcaster observed, watching his expression. "What do you see?" Ben focused on the sensation, trying to articulate the information being conveyed. "Species. Thousands of them. From dimensions that operate under different physical laws than ours. The shadow Omnitrix contains DNA samples from the apex predators of each realm." He turned the page, and a particular AR illustration caught his attention. A a humanoid figure composed of what appeared to be liquid shadow, with tendrils extending from its form to connect with multiple smaller entities surrounding it. The altered Omnitrix pulsed strongly in recognition. Umbra, Ben said with certainty. Or at least, the species he belongs to. They're called. He concentrated on the impression forming in his mind. The Nexus. They evolved in the spaces between dimensions, feeding on the energy of reality breaches. Charmcaster leaned closer, studying the illustration with intense focus. The book confirms what the legend suggested. Umbra isn't just using the convergence for conquest, he needs it to survive. Each merger of dimensions creates the energy his species consumes. So he's not just a conqueror, Ben concluded. He's a predator, and entire dimensions are his prey. The implications settled heavily between them as the first rays of dawn penetrated the temple through cleverly designed light shafts in the ceiling, casting the chamber in a warm golden glow that contrasted with the cool blue of the magical illumination. We should rest, Charmcaster suggested, closing the book carefully. Tomorrow we begin your training with the Shadow Omnitrix. If Umbra follows his usual pattern, we have a few days before he attempts to breach our dimension fully. Ben nodded, suddenly aware of the knee-deep exhaustion that had been building since his encounter with the Shadow Omnitrix. Where do we sleep in this magical mystery mansion? Charmcaster smiled faintly. As I said, the temple adapts to the needs of its occupants. She gestured to a previously empty wall where 4 doorways had appeared, each marked with a symbol that somehow conveyed the identity of its intended resident. Your quarters should have everything you need. Quote, as Ben approached the doorway marked with a symbol reminiscent of the Omnitrix, he felt the altered device pulse once more, a sensation that was becoming familiar. Almost comforting in its regularity. The door opened at his touch, revealing a spacious room with a large bed, basic furnishings, and a circular area in one corner that resembled a training space. Try to sleep, Charmcaster advised from the doorway. The Shadow Omnitrix will continue to integrate whether you're conscious or not, but rest will help your mind process the changes more effectively. Ben turned to thank her, but found himself momentarily struck by how different she appeared in this setting. More scholar than sorceress, her usual intensity softened by evident fatigue and genuine concern. It was a far cry from the vengeful young woman who had tried to destroy him and his friends multiple times over the years. Why are you really helping me, Hope? He asked quietly. And, don't give me the redemption speech again. There's more to it than that. Charmcaster hesitated, conflict evident in her expression before she finally answered. Because I've seen what the Shadow Omnitrix can do in the wrong hands. She touched her arm unconsciously, and Ben noticed for the first time a thin scar running from her wrist to her elbow. In one of the dimensions I visited during my more misguided years, I encountered a version of you who had embraced its power completely. A chill ran down Ben's spine. What happened? He had conquered his Earth, she replied simply. Remad. He in his image using the Shadow Omnitrix's ability to manipulate reality itself. And he was hollow, empty despite all that power. Her gaze met his directly. I don't want to see that happen to this version of Ben Tennyson. With that, she turned and left, closing the door softly behind her and leaving Ben alone with her words and the gently pulsing device on his wrist. As he lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling where patterns of light and shadow played across ancient stone, Ben reflected on everything that had happened since the dimensional anomaly had appeared above Bellwood mere hours ago. His life had been strange from the moment he found the original Omnitrix at age 10, but this felt different, a fundamental shift rather than just another alien encounter. The altered Omnitrix pulsed against his skin, and with each pulse came more knowledge, more understanding of the power now literally merged with his being. The Shadow Omnitrix wasn't evil, he realized, it was simply amoral. A tool of incredible potential that reflected the intentions of its wielder. In Umbra's hands, it was a weapon of conquest. In Ben's hands, well, that remained to be seen. As exhaustion finally claimed him, Ben's last conscious thought was a simple promise to himself. He would master this power, not for conquest or even just survival, but to protect the dimension he called home, and perhaps, if necessary, all the others connected to it. In the darkness behind his closed eyes, the altered Omnitrix pulsed once more, as if in agreement. Chapter 1 End Chapter 2, Frozen Flames. Moonlight, filtered through the temple's crystalline skylights, casting prismatic patterns across Ben's sleeping form. He dreamed of worlds consumed by shadow, planets where evolution had taken darker paths, i.e.s. that thrived in the absence of light. In his dream, he moved between these realms effortlessly, his consciousness expanding beyond the limitations of human perception. He was everywhere and nowhere, both observer and participant in the cosmic dance of creation and destruction. Then the dream shifted, focusing on a single world, a planet of perpetual twilight where massive crystal formations jutted from an obsidian landscape. At the center of a vast crystal field stood a familiar figure, Azimuth, the first thinker, creator of the original Omnitrix. But this version of the Galvan genius read different. His eyes glowed with violet light, and patterns of shadow shifted across his gray skin like living tattoos. "You're not the Azimuth I know," Ben said, his voice echoing strangely in the dreamscape. The shadow Azimuth inclined his head slightly. "Indeed, I am what your Azimuth might have become had he embraced certain philosophical alternatives. You created the shadow Omnitrix. In this reality, yes." Shadow Azimuth gestured to the device on Ben's wrist, which pulsed in recognition. "An instrument of balance to counter my counterpart's naive idealism. The universe requires both light and shadow, creation and destruction." Ben looked down at the altered Omnitrix, watching as it cycled between green and violet. "Why is it merging with my original Omnitrix? What's the purpose?" "Purpose?" Shadow Azimuth's laugh was cold, brittle. "The shadow Omnitrix doesn't serve a purpose, it creates possibility. The merger wasn't by design, it's an unprecedented reaction to your unique UE genetic signature and your years bonded to the original device." Before Ben could ask more questions, the dreamscape began to dissolve, crystal formations crumbling into dust that swirled around them. Shadow Azimuth remained calm, watching Ben with those unsettling violet eyes. "He's coming," the Galvan said simply. "Umbra senses the merger and understands its significance better than you possibly could. Seek my counterpart if you wish, Tennyson, but know this, not even the first thinker anticipated the power you now wield." The dream collapsed completely, reality fragmenting into shards of crystalline light that pierced Ben's consciousness like knives. He woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright as the altered Omnitrix pulsed rapidly against his wrist. Sweat beaded his forehead despite the cool temperature of the room, and his heart hammered in his chest as the last images of the dream lingered in his mind's eye. "Just a dream," he muttered, running his free hand through sweat-dampened hair. "Or maybe not." The altered Omnitrix continued its agitated pulsing, the swirling pattern of green and violet shifting more rapidly than normal. Ben stared at it, remembering Shadow Azimuth's words. "Not even the first thinker anticipated the power you now wield." A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Ben," Gwen's voice called. "Are you awake? We've got a situation coming," he replied, quickly pulling on his jeans and the black t-shirt that had been provided in his quarters. The altered Omnitrix settled somewhat as he moved, its pulsing slowing to a more regular rhythm. He opened the door to find his cousin looking as if she hadn't slept, her red hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, dark circles under her eyes, a tablet computer clutched in her hand. "What's wrong?" "Plumber emergency broadcast," she explained, leading him toward the main chamber where Kevin and Charmcaster were already gathered around the central platform. "A base in the Arctic Circle went dark an hour ago. Last transmission mentioned shadows that move on their own, before cutting out." The main chamber had transformed overnight, the temple adapting to their needs as Charmcaster had explained. New workstations filled the space, each seemingly customized for its intended user, a tactical display for Kevin, magical reference materials for Gwen, and a circular interface resembling the Omnitrix's control system that presumably was meant for Ben. "Morning, sunshine," Kevin greeted without looking up from the tactical display, where satellite imagery showed a remote plumber facee. Liddy nestled among ice-covered mountains. "Sleep well while the rest of us were working." "Lay off, Kevin," Gwen admonished. "Ben needed the rest more than any of us." Charmcaster stood at the mirror of worlds, the liquid silver surface showing rippling images of the Arctic base from various angles. She wore the same practical outfit as the day before, but had added a short hooded cloak that she mered faintly with protective enchantments. "The temple's scrying capabilities are limited by Umbra's interference," she explained as Ben approached. But I've managed to get some visual feed from the base. She gestured to the mirror, which focused on a particular image. Shadowy figures moving through the facility's corridors, their forms seeming to shift and flow like liquid darkness. These aren't ordinary intruders. Ben studied the image, feeling the altered Omnitrix pulse in recognition. Shadow constructs, he said with certainty, knowledge flowing into his mind from the device. Xday. Scions of Umbra's consciousness given semi-independent form. He's using them to scout our dimension, looking for weak points in the fabric of reality. And the plumber base has technology that could help him identify those weak points. Gwen concluded, scrolling through data on her tablet, including experimental phase shift technology designed to detect dimensional anomalies. Which is exact Why what he needs to initiate a full convergence, Charmcaster added grimly. If Umbra gets his hands on that technology, he could accelerate his plans significantly. Ben felt a sense of responsibility settle heavily on his shoulders. Then we need to secure that base. Now. That's the plan, Kevin agreed, finally looking up from the tactical display. But there's a complication. The base is located in Kraho territory, the volcanic region below the Arctic ice where Ester's people live. According to plumber protocols, we need their permission to mount a large-scale operation in their domain. And the Kraho aren't exactly fans of outsiders messing around in their territory, Gwen added. Not after that business with the artificial volcano a few years back. Ben nodded, remembering the incident well. The Kraho were a species adapted to extreme heat, having settled in the naturally occurring volcanic region beneath the Arctic ice. Their initial contact with humans had been hostile, but Ester, half human, half Kraho, had helped broker a peace agreement that established their territory as sovereign while maintaining diplomatic relations with Earth governments. Ester will help us, Ben said with confidence. She understands the importance of plumber operations. That's what we're counting on, Gwen replied, handing him the tablet. We've sent a diplomatic request through official channels, but given the urgency, a personal appeal might work better. Ben scrolled through the information on the screen, which included coordinates for the Kraho settlement and a formal request for emergency access to their territory. You want me to go talk to her? You have history with Ester, Charmcaster observed neutrally, though something in her tone suggested she knew more about that history than Ben was comfortable with. She might be more receptive to your request than an official plumber delegation. Plus, we need to test how the Shadow Omnitrix functions in extreme environments, Kevin added pragmatically. Arctic conditions with volcanic hotspots. Perfect testing ground. Ben glanced down at the altered device, which pulsed as if in agreement. I suppose it makes sense. But what about Umbra's shadow constructs? They've already infiltrated the base. They appear to be contained within the facility for now, Charmcaster explained, gesturing to the mirror of WORLDS where the shadowy figures seemed unable to pass through certain doorways marked with glowing symbols. The plumbers activated emergency containment protocols before communication was lost. Are dimensional barriers designed to prevent extra-dimensional entities from escaping. Those barriers won't hold forever, Gwen warned. According to the base schematics, the power systems can aim them for approximately 12 hours before failing. So I've got 12 hours to convince the Kraho to let us into their territory, then lead a strike team to clear the base of shadow constructs and secure the phase shift technology. Ben summarized. Just another Tuesday, huh? Kevin snorted. It's Friday, hero. Figure of speech, Levin. Ben handed the tablet back to Gwen. I'll need transportation to the Kraho settlement. And a way to contact you once I've secured their permission. Already handled, Kevin replied, tossing him a small metallic sphere about the size of a golf ball. Plumber emergency transport beacon. Twist the hemispheres in opposite directions to activate. It'll open a direct slipspace portal to these coordinates. Range is limited to Earth's atmosphere, BU. It'll get you back here fast once you've got the all clear from Ester. Ben pocketed the device, then turned to Charmcaster. Any magical advice for dealing with shadow constructs if I run into them? She considered the question, then approached one of the many bookshelves lining the chamber walls. After a moment of searching, she selected a small leather pouch and handed it to him. Luminous dust. It's harvested from crystals that grow only in dimensions of pure light. Sprinkle it on a shadow construct and it will temporarily disrupt its cohesion. Temporarily. The effect lasts about 30 seconds, she admitted. But that should be enough time to either escape or deliver a more permanent solution via the Omnitrix. Ben tucked the pouch into his jacket pocket, then faced his assembled team. How am I getting to the Arctic? Gwen smiled, already drawing magical symbols in the air with glowing mana. Express delivery. Before Ben could protest, she completed the teleportation spell, enveloping him in a sphere of pink energy that compressed rapidly, folding space around him until he felt himself being pulled through a dimensional pocket, a disorienting but familiar sensation. After years of working with his magically gifted cousin, the teleportation ended abruptly, depositing him on a snowfield with enough force to sink him knee-deep in powder. Arctic wind howled around him, carrying ice crystals that stung his exposed skin like tiny needles. Through the swirling snow, he could just make out a series of steam vents rising from the ice about half a mile ahead, the Sioux. Our face indication of the Kraho settlement below. Thanks for the warning, Gwen, he muttered, wrapping his arms around himself as the cold immediately began to seep through his clothing. The altered Omnitrix pulsed against his wrist, and Ben felt an unusual sensation, a warmth spreading from the device throughout his body, regulating his temperature to counteract the extreme cold. That's new, he observed, watching as his breath no longer formed visible clouds in the frigid air. Useful, though. Adjusting to his bearings, Ben began trudging through the deep snow toward the steam vents. The altered Omnitrix continued pulsing steadily, the swirling green and violet pattern shifting slightly toward the violet end of the spectrum as it actively worked to maintain his body temperature. As he approached the settlement entrance, a large circular hole in the ice from which waves of heat emanated, Ben noticed movement at the perimeter. Figures emerged from concealed positions in the snow, heat-resistant environmental suits marking them as Kraho sentries. 6 of them surrounded him in a practiced formation, leveling weapons that appeared to be a mix of traditional Kraho design and more advanced technology. Identify yourself and state your business, commanded the lead sentry, voice distorted by the environmental suit's communication system. Ben raised his hand slowly, making sure the altered Omnitrix was clearly visible. I'm Ben Tennyson. I need to speak with Ester on urgent plumber business. The sentries exchanged glances, clearly recognizing his name but uncertain about the protocol for his unexpected arrival. After a brief consultation in their native language, the lead sentry nodded and gestured for Ben to follow. The chief will determine if you are granted an audience, the sentry informed him, leading the way toward the settlement entrance. Ben blinked in surprise. Chief, you mean Ester? The sentry didn't respond, continuing toward the large opening in the ice. As they approached, the heat intensified to levels that would be uncomfortable for most humans, but the altered Omnitrix adjusted Ben's temperature regulation accordingly. They descend via a spiraling ramp that wound its way down through layers of ice and rock, eventually opening into a vast underground cavern illuminated by the orange glow of lava flows that ran through channels throughout the settlement. The Kraho village had evolved significantly since Ben's last visit years before. What had once been a simple collection of heat-resistant structures had grown into a proper city, with buildings of varying sizes constructed from a black stone that seemed to absorb and redistribute the intense heat from the lava flows. Kraho citizens moved about their daily business, any stopping to stare at the human visitor being escorted through their midst. The sentries led Ben to the largest structure at the center of the settlement, a domed building adorned with symbols that appeared to represent the Kraho's cultural history. 2 more guards flanked the entrance, stepping aside as the lead sentry approached and spoke quietly in their native tongue. After a moment, one of the guards entered the building while the other gestured for Ben to wait. The escorting sentries maintained their positions around him, not hostile but clearly alert to any potential threat he might pose. Several minutes passed before the guard returned, nodding to the lead sentry. The chief will see you now. Weapons must be surrendered before entry. I don't carry weapons, Ben replied, then glanced at the altered Omnitrix. Well, except this, but it doesn't exactly detach. The guard studied the device with narrowed eyes. The Omnitrix is known to us. You may enter with it, but beware. RNED. Any transformation within the chief's chambers without explicit permission will be considered an act of aggression. Ben nodded his understanding and followed the guard into the building. The interior was surprisingly cool compared to the rest of the settlement, still warm by human standards, but regulated to a temperature that would be comfortable for both Kraho and visitors from the surface. The architecture was minimalist but elegant, with smooth black stone walls inlaid with veins of what appeared to be naturally occurring metal that glowed with residual heat. They passed through several chambers, each serving an obvious governmental function. Rooms filled with maps and monitoring equipment, others where Kraho officials discussed matters of state, and one that appeared to be a strategic planning center with a three-dimensional holographic display of the entire Arctic region. Finally, they reached a set of double doors made from a deep red material that resembled polished wood but clearly wasn't. Given the environment, the guard announced their presence, and a familiar voice called from within, "Enter." The doors swung open to reveal a spacious circular chamber designed for diplomatic functions. A round table of the same red material as the doors dominated the center of the room, surrounded by chairs of varying designs to accommodate different species. At the far side, standing before a wall of monitors displaying data from around the settlement, was Ester. Ben almost didn't recognize her at first. The playful, somewhat impulsive young woman he had known years ago had been replaced by a poised, confident leader. Her magenta hair was longer now, pulled back in an intricate braid that emphasized the elegant lines of her face. She wore a formal outfit that combined traditional Kraho elements with more practical modern components, a fitted black bodysuit beneath a sleeveless tunic of deep red, adorned with symbols of office that marked her as the settlement's leader. When she turned to face him, Ben saw that her eyes remained the same, bright, intelligent, and instantly able to see through any pretense. "Ben Tennyson," she said, her voice carrying the authority of her position but warming slightly with recognition. "It's been what, 3 years? 4, he corrected, suddenly aware of how much had changed for both of them since their last meeting. "You've moved up in the world." A smile touched her lips briefly. "My father passed 2 years ago. As his only child, leadership fell to me." She gestured to the monitoring stations. "We've built something here that honors his vision, a self-sufficient Kraho society that maintains diplomatic relations with the surface while preserving our independence." Ben nodded, genuinely impressed. "It's incredible, what you've accomplished. And yet you're not here to catch up on old times," Ester observed shrewdly, her gaze dropping to the altered Omnitrix on his wrist. "That's new, and concerning, given the energy signature it's emitting." Ben glanced down at the device, which pulsed more rapidly in Ester's presence. "You can sense the energy. The Kraho are sensitive to certain wavelengths beyond normal human perception," she explained, gesturing for him to take a seat at the table as she did the same. "Particularly those associated with dimensional breaches, a survival adaptation for our ancestors who navigated unstable volcanic regions prone to such phenomena." Once they were seated, Ester dismissed the guard with a subtle gesture, leaving them alone in the chamber. "Now, why don't you tell me why a plumber agent with an obviously modified Omnitrix has appeared in my settlement without official notification?" Ben recognized the diplomatic approach. She already knew why he was there. But protocol demanded he state his purpose formally. "There's been an incident at the plumber research base in Sector 7 of your territory. It's been infiltrated by extra-dimensional entities that pose a threat not just to your people, but potentially to Earth itself." Ester's expression remained neutral, but Ben caught the slight tension in her shoulders. "The facility you refer to was established under Article 4 of our treaty with the plumbers, a non-interference agreement that specifically prohibits research into dimensional technology within our sovereign territory." "I'm no privy to exactly what research they were conducting," Ben admitted. "But I do know that the base has been compromised by entities serving an interdimensional conqueror called Lord Umbra. If he gains access to the technology in that facility, he could open a permanent breach between our dimension and his, with catastrophic consequences." Ester studied him for a long moment, her gaze calculating. "And this modified Omnitrix, I assume it's connected to these events?" Ben hesitated, then decided that honesty was the best approach with someone as perceptive as Ester. "It's called the Shadow Omnitrix. It appeared through a dimensional breach and merged with my original device. It contains DNA from shadow species across multiple dimensions, and it's," changing me in ways I don't fully understand yet. Is it controlling you? She asked bluntly. No, Ben replied firmly. It's influencing me, trying to guide me toward using its power, but I'm resisting the darker impulses it generates. Ester nodded, seemingly satisfied with his answer. She stood and moved to a control panel on the wall, inputting a series of commands that brought up detailed schematics of the plumber facility on the room's main display. We've been monitoring the base since communications went dark, she revealed. Our sensors detected the dimensional disturbance 6 hours ago, but the treaty prevents us from interfering directly with plumber operations unless formally requested. She turned back to face him. I assume that's why you're here. To make that formal request. Ben stood as well, approaching the display to examine the schematics. Yes, we need permission to enter your territory and secure the facility before these shadow constructs can breach the containment protocols. Shadow constructs, Ester repeated, eyes narrowing. You seem quite familiar with these entities. Ben tapped the altered Omnitrix. The Shadow Omnitrix is providing information about them. They're extensions of Umbra, himself. Scouts sent ahead to prepare our dimension for his arrival. Ester studied the schematics, her expression grave. According to our monitoring, the constructs are concentrated in the central research lab, where the phase shift technology is housed. She turned to Ben, decision made. I'll grant the plumbers access to our territory for this operation, but with conditions. Name them, Ben said, relieved that she was being reasonable. First, I personally accompany the strike team, she stated firmly. This is Kraho territory, and I won't have outside forces operating here without direct oversight. Agreed, Ben nodded. What else? Second, full disclosure about this Lord Umbra and the Shadow Omnitrix. My people need to understand the threat we're facing. Ben hesitated only briefly, also agreed, though some of the information is still unclear even to me. And third, Ester continued, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. Once the immediate threat is contained, we renegotiate Article 4 of the treaty. No more secret dimensional research in my territory without explicit Kraho involvement and oversight. That's beyond my authority, Ben admitted. But I'll port your position with Plumber Command. It's a reasonable request, especially given the circumstances. Ester seemed satisfied with his response, extending her hand in the formal Kraho manner, arm straight, palm vertical. Then we have an agreement, Ben Tennyson. Ben reciprocated the gesture, completing the formal handshake. As their hands met, the altered Omnitrix pulsed strongly, sending a wave of warmth up his arm that clearly surprised Ester, causing her to pull back slightly. Sorry, Ben apologized. It does that sometimes. Still getting used to it. Ester looked at him with renewed concern. This device, it's dangerous. Isn't it? Not just to others, but to you. Ben couldn't deny it. Yes, but right now, it might be our best chance against Umbra and his forces. She studied him for a moment longer, then nodded decisively. I'll prepare a strike team of my best warriors to accompany us. The Kraho have experience fighting in the extreme conditions around the base. She moved to another control panel, activating an internal communication system. How quickly can your plumber reinforcements arrive? Ben withdrew the transport beacon Kevin had given him. Immediately, once I activate this, it'll open a portal directly to our staging area. Efficient, Ester commented with approval. She issued several commands in the Kraho language through the communication system, then turned back to Ben. My team will be ready in 20 minutes. Use that time to brief your people and prepare your equipment. As she moved toward a side chamber, presumably to prepare herself, Ben activated his communicator. Gwen, I'm in. Ester has agreed to grant us access with conditions, including her personal participation in the operation. That's actually perfect, Gwen's voice replied through the communicator. Her abilities will be valuable, especially in that environment. What are the other conditions? Full disclosure about Umbra and the Shadow Omnitrix, plus a renegotiate ion of the treaty regarding dimensional research in their territory. There was a brief pause before Gwen responded. Grandpa Max has authorized both conditions. He says the treaty renegotiation was already being considered after recent events. Good, Ben said, relieved. I'm going to activate the transport beacon in 15 minutes. Have the team ready. Understood. Kevin has assembled tactical gear for the environment. And Charmcaster has prepared magical countermeasures against the shadow constructs. We'll be ready. Ben ended the communication and found himself alone in the diplomatic chamber. The altered Omnitrix pulsing steadily against his wrist. He studied the device, watching as the swirling pattern of green and violet shifted and changed like a living thing. Despite the danger it represented, he couldn't deny a growing connection to it, as if the shadow Omnitrix was becoming an extension of himself in a way the original device never had. "What are you, really?" he murmured to the device. "What's your true purpose?" The Omnitrix pulsed once, strongly, and Ben felt rather than heard a response, not in words, but in concepts and impressions that formed in his mind. Balance. Evolution. Potential. Asterisk. Before he could process this unusual communication, Ester returned to the chamber. She had changed into combat attire, a fitted environmental suit designed for extreme conditions. Reinforced at critical points and equipped with various tools and weapons. Her hair was now secured in a tight bun, and she carried what appeared to be a specialized rifle of Kraho design. "My team is assembled," she informed him. 12 of our best, all veterans of the Environmental Defense Force. Ben nodded, impressed by the efficiency of her operation. "Our team will likely be smaller, probably just my cousin Gwen, her partner Kevin, and a magical consultant named Charmcaster." Ester raised an eyebrow. Charmcaster, the same sorceress who tried to destroy Bellwood multiple times. "She's reformed," Ben explained, somewhat awkwardly. "Working with the plumbers now. Her knowledge of interdimensional entities is proving invaluable." "I see," Ester replied, her tone neutral but her expression skeptical. "Your ability to see the best in former enemies has always been both your greatest strength and your most dangerous vulnerability, Ben." Before he could respond to that surprisingly insightful observation, a Kraho officer entered the chamber and announced something in their native language. Ester nodded and gestured for Ben to follow. "My team is ready," she translated. "We'll proceed to the surface departure point." They moved through the settlement with purpose, Kraho citizens clearing a path respectfully as their chief led the human visitor toward what appeared to be a military staging area. There, 12 Kraho warriors in environmental combat suits stood at attention, their discipline evident in their posture and the way they assessed Ben with professional detachment rather than curiosity or suspicion. "Impressive," Ben commented sincerely. "The Environmental Defense Force is our elite unit," Ester explained with quiet pride. "Trained to operate in the most extreme conditions our territory offers, from the magma chambers below to the ice fields above." Ben activated his communicator again. "Gwen, we're ready." Activating the transport beacon now. He removed the small metallic sphere from his pocket and twisted the hemispheres as Kevin had instructed. The device hummed to life, projecting a field of energy that rapidly expanded into a swirling portal approximately 8 feet in diameter. Through it, Ben could see the main chamber of the Temple of Ashmedai, where Gwen, Kevin, and Charmcaster stood prepared for the operation. The altered Omnitrix reacted to the portal's formation, pulsing rapidly as if excited by the manipulation of dimensional space. Ben felt a surge of power from the device, along with an impulse to reach into the portal and somehow reshape it. He resisted the urge, focusing instead on maintaining his composure as Gwen led their team through the opening. "Successful test of the transport beacon," Kevin commented as he stepped through, carrying what appeared to be heavy weapons cases. "Nice work, Tennyson." Gwen followed, dressed in a specialized combat suit that combined protective elements with freedom of movement for her magical abilities. She nodded respectfully to Ester. "Chief Ester, thank you for your cooperation in this matter." "Gwen," Ester acknowledged with a slight incline of her head. "It's been some time." Charmcaster was the last to emerge from the portal, her appearance immediately drawing the attention of the Kraho warriors. She wore her usual practical outfit but had added several magical artifacts, amulets, pouches, and a staff of twisted white wood that hummed with power. Her silver hair seemed to move slightly of its own accord, responding to the magical energies she channeled. "Hope Silverman," she introduced herself formally to Ester, using her real name rather than her alias. "Archimata practitioner and plumber consultant. I'm here to assist with the extra-dimensional entities." Ester studied her for a moment before nodding. "Your reputation precedes you, Ms. Silverman. I trust that reputation is now an asset rather than a liability to this operation." "It is." Charmcaster confirmed simply, unfazed by the implied challenge in Ester's words. Ben observed the interaction with interest, noting the immediate assessment occurring between two powerful women accustomed to leadership. After a moment of mutual evaluation, both seemed to reach an unspoken understanding, turning their attention to the task at hand. The plumber facility is approximately 12 kilometers from our position, Ester informed the assembled group, activating a holographic display from a device on her wrist. Environmental conditions are extreme, surface temperature -40 degrees Celsius, with volcanic vents creating pockets of extreme heat differential. Visibility is limited due to steam interactions with the polar air mass. Kevin opened one of the cases he had brought, revealing specialized environmental gear. We came prepared. These suits will protect against both extremes and maintain communication in the field. As the plumber team donned their equipment, Ester continued the briefing. According to our monitoring, the shadow constructs remain contained within the central research lab. Plumber containment protocols are holding but showing signs of deterioration. Estimated failure in, she checked a readout on her wrist device, 5 hours and 17 minutes. Then we need to move quickly, Ben said, examining the tactical display. What's our approach? Ester gestured to the holographic map. The facility has 4 entry points. I suggest we split into 2 teams. My warriors will secure the perimeter and auxiliary systems while your team penetrates to the central lab where the constructs are concentrated. Agreed, Gwen said, completing the final adjustments on her environmental suit. Ben's transformations, combined with my mana manipulation and Hope's magical countermeasures, give us the best chance against these entities. I'll coordinate with the Kraho team, Kevin added. My absorption abilities work well in conjunction with their tactical approach. Ester nodded, satisfied with the plan. We'll use Kraho transports to reach the facility. They're designed for these conditions and won't be affected by the electromagnetic interference surrounding the base. As the teams made final preparations, Ben found himself standing slightly apart, examining the altered Omnitrix with concern. The device continued its agitated pulsing. The swirling pattern now dominated by violet rather than the balanced mix of green and violet it had displayed earlier. It senses the proximity to its kind, came Charmcaster's voice as she approached quietly. The shadow constructs are extensions of Umbra, who created the shadow Omnitrix. The connection is inevitable. Is it going to be a problem? Ben asked, keeping his voice low to avoid alarming the others. Charmcaster considered the question carefully. It might actually be an advantage. The connection could give you insight into the construct's weaknesses. She moved a small amulet from around her neck and offered it to him. But wear this, just in case. It's a focuser. It won't block the shadow Omnitrix's functions, but it will help you maintain your own consciousness if the device tries to assert control during a transformation. Ben accepted the amulet gratefully, slipping it over his head and tucking it beneath his environmental suit. The moment it touched his skin, he felt a subtle shift in the altered Omnitrix's energy, not suppressed, but somehow more aligned with his own natural biorhythms. Thanks, he said sincerely, for everything you're doing to help. A ghost of a smile touched Charmcaster's lips. Don't thank me yet, Tennyson. We still have to face these constructs. She glanced toward Ester, who was issuing final instructions to her warriors. Your friend is impressive, much more mature than I expected. People change, Ben replied, following her gaze. Ester took on her responsibilities as chief and grew into the role. She's a natural leader. And you? Charmcaster asked, her perceptive violet eyes studying him. How have you changed since I saw you last? Ben considered the question, watching as Ester efficient. Lee organized her team with the confidence of someone who had earned her authority rather than simply inherited it. I'd like to think I've grown up too. Learned when to fight and when to listen. He glanced down at the altered Omnitrix. Though some lessons are harder than others. Charmcaster nodded, understanding in her expression. The most important growth rarely happens when we're comfortable. With that cryptic observation, she moved to join Gwen, who was reviewing magical countermeasures for the shadow constructs. Soon, the combined team boarded the Kraho transports, specialized vehicle. Less designed to traverse the harsh Arctic environment. They resembled massive tracked tanks, but with heat-resistant components and advanced navigation systems. The interior was surprisingly spacious, accommodating both teams with room for their equipment. Ben found himself seated beside Ester in the lead transport as they departed the settlement, ascending the spiral ramp toward the surface. The Kraho chief maintained a professional demeanor, reviewing tactical information on her wrist device, but Ben sensed an underlying tension in her posture. "You're worried about more than just this mission," he observed quietly. Ester glanced at him, a flicker of surprise crossing her features before she composed herself again. "You've gotten more perceptive, or maybe I just pay more attention now," he replied with a small smile. She studied him for a moment, then nodded slightly. "My responsibilities extend beyond just this operation. If Umbra breaches our dimension as you believe he will, the consequences for my people could be devastating." She gestured to the transport's viewport, where the harsh Arctic landscape was becoming visible as they approached the surface. "We've built nothing precious here, a home where the Kraho can thrive rather than merely survive. I won't let it be destroyed by an interdimensional invader." "We won't let that happen," Ben assured her, the conviction in his voice surprising even himself. "Whatever it takes, we'll stop Umbra before he can fully enter our dimension." Ester's expression softened slightly. The Ben Tennyson I remember made similar promises, but with more bravado and less understanding of what they truly meant. She met his gaze directly. "You have changed." Before Ben could respond, the transport emerged onto the surface, immediately buffeted by the Arctic winds. Through the viewport, he could see the stark white landscape stretching endlessly in all directions, broken only by the occasional steam vent from the volcanic activity below. "Approaching Plumber Facility," announced the Kraho driver. "ETA 12 minutes. Ester activated the transport's communication system, addressing both vehicles. "Final equipment check. We'll establish a perimeter upon arrival and proceed according to plan. Team leaders confirm readiness." "Kraho strike team ready," responded one of her warriors over the comm. "Plumber team ready," Gwen confirmed from the second transport. As they approached the facility, Ben could see the first signs of trouble. The normally concealed entrance was exposed, the reinforced doors standing open despite the extreme cold. Snow had drifted into the opening, but strange patterns in the accumulation suggested recent movement. "Something's wrong," Ester observed, activating enhanced scanning functions on the transport systems. The containment protocols should have sealed all external access points. The altered Omnitrix pulsed strongly, and Ben felt a wave of knowledge flow into his mind. "The shadow constructs are more adaptable than we anticipated. They're learning to manipulate physical objects in our dimension. That accelerates our timeline," Ester concluded grimly. "If they've breached the outer containment, the inner barriers protecting the research lab won't hold much longer." The transports came to a halt approximately 100 meters from the facility entrance. The teams disembarked quickly, the Kraho warriors immediately establishing a defensive perimeter while the plumber team prepared their specialized equipment. Thermal scans show multiple cold spots moving through the facility, Kevin reported, examining a handheld scanner. "The shadow constructs don't register on normal thermal imaging, they appear as voids in the background temperature." "I can track them magically," Gwen added, her hands glowing with mana as she performed a detection spell. "They leave a distinctive energy signature, like tears in the fabric of our dimension." Ben studied the facility entrance, feeling the altered Omnitrix respond to the proximity of the shadow constructs. The device's pulsing had settled into a steady rhythm, the swirling pattern now balanced between green and violet once more. Whatever connection existed between the shadow Omnitrix and Umbra's constructs, it seemed to have stabilized rather than intensified with proximity. "What's our play?" Kevin asked, looking to Ben and Ester for direction. "We stick to the plan," Ester decided after consulting her tactical display. "My team secures the perimeter and auxiliary systems. Your team proceeds to the central lab to contain the constructs." Ben nodded in agreement. "We'll need to move fast. If the constructs have already breached the outer containment, they might be working on bypassing the inner barriers as we speak." "Then let's not waste any more time," Ester concluded, signaling her warriors to advance. The Kraho strike team moved with impressive coordination, securing the entrance and establishing a defensive formation that would allow the plumber team to penetrate deeper into the facility. Ben, Gwen, Kevin, and Charmcaster prepared to enter, each checking their equipment one final time. Be careful in there, Ester said to Ben as he adjusted his environmental suit. These shadow constructs may be more dangerous than we anticipate. Always am, Ben replied with a confidence he didn't entirely feel. The altered Omnitrix pulsed against his wrist, almost as if responding to his uncertainty with reassurance. Ester's expression suggested she didn't entirely believe him. But she nodded and turned to lead her team into position. As she moved away, Ben couldn't help but notice the graceful efficiency of her movements, the mark of someone who had trained extensively for combat in extreme conditions. Ready? Gwen asked, appearing at his side with Charmcaster and Kevin. Ben focused on the mission ahead, pushing aside all other thoughts. Ready, let's do this. The plumber team entered the facility, moving carefully through the open entrance into a decontamination chamber that had clearly been compromised, equipment scattered across the floor, control panels damaged, and most concerning, dark residue clinging to surfaces like dried oil that seemed to shift slightly when viewed from the corner of the eye. Shadow residue, Charmcaster identified, keeping her voice low. The constructs have been through here recently. Kevin touched one of the intact control panels, absorbing its metallic composition to form his characteristic armor. Main power's still online, but security systems are offline throughout the facility. Gwen created a small mana construct that resembled a compass, the energy pointer spinning briefly before settling on a direction. The highest concentration of shadow energy is that way, consistent with the location of the central research lab. They proceeded deeper into the facility, moving through corridors where Emergank. Why lighting cast eerie red glows across abandoned workstations and laboratories. The evidence of a hasty evacuation was everywhere, personal items left behind, equipment still running, and in one particularly disturbing scene, a half-eaten meal frozen solid by the extreme cold that had penetrated this section of the facility. The plumbers got most of the personnel out, Kevin observed, examining a security station. According to the logs, they initiated emergency protocols and evacuation procedures when the first shadow construct was detected. Only a skeleton crew remained to activate the containment barriers. And what happened to them? Ben asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Kevin's expression darkened. No life signs registered in the facility. Either they got out through another exit, or the constructs took them, Charmcaster finished grimly. Umbra often captures indigenous lifeforms to study their physiological responses to dimensional shifts. The ALTERED Omnitrix pulsed strongly at her words, and Ben felt another wave of knowledge flow into his mind. Disturbing images of captured beings suspended in a void between dimensions, their physical form gradually dissolving as Umbra extracted information from their very essence. We need to hurry, Ben said, pushing the horrific visions aside. If there are survivors, they won't last long in Umbra's dimension. They increased their pace, moving quickly but cautiously through the abandoned facility. As they approached the central research lab, the ambient temperature began to drop precipitously, their environmental suits compensating automatically for the change. The cold is unnatural, Charmcaster warned, her breath visible despite her suit's thermal regulation. Shadow constructs absorb thermal energy from their surroundings. It's how they maintain cohesion in our dimension. The corridor ahead terminated at a massive reinforced door marked with hazard symbols and plumber security designations. The containment barrier that should have been active across the entrance was flickering erratically, the energy field destabilizing visibly as they watched. That's not going to hold much longer, Gwen observed, her hands already glowing with mana as she prepared a reinforcement spell. Before she could cast it, the barrier collapsed completely, the energy dispersing in a flash of blue light. The reinforced door behind it began to shudder, as if something on the other side was striking it repeatedly with tremendous force. Get ready, Ben said, activating the altered Omnitrix. The device responded immediately, the selection interface appearing with a mix of familiar silhouettes and new, darker forms he didn't recognize. He selected one of his most reliable transformations, Diamond Head, the crystalline Petrosapian whose durability and versatile abilities had proven effective against a wide range of threats. As the transformation sequence began, Ben felt the usual rush of genetic reconfiguration. But with a disturbing difference, the Shadow Omnitrix's influence manifested as a violet energy that seemed to alter the process, twisting it into something new. When the transformation completed, Ben found himself in a form that resembled Diamondhead but with significant differences. Instead of the green crystalline structure of a normal Petrosapian, his body was composed of obsidian black crystal shot through with veins of pulsing violet energy. The crystals were sharper, more angular, and seemed to absorb light rather than refract it. Ben, Gwen asked cautiously, clearly disturbed by his altered appearance. I'm still me, he assured her, his voice deeper and resonating strangely, as if speaking through layers of crystal. This is Shadow Diamondhead, I guess. Same basic abilities but amplified in some ways. As if to test this assertion, he generated a crystal shard from his arm, a standard Diamondhead ability, but instead of the usual green crystal, Chi was black with violet energy running through it. When he launched it at a nearby wall, it didn't merely embed itself as a normal crystal shard would, it seemed to partially phase through the solid matter, creating a spatial distortion at the point of impact. Fascinating, Charmcaster observed. The Shadow Omnitrix is altering the fundamental properties of the alien DNA, allowing it to interact with dimensional boundaries. Before they could discuss this further, the reinforced door buckled inward with a screech of protesting metal. Through the widening gap, they caught their first clear glimpse of the shadow constructs, humanoid figures composed of what appeared to be living darkness, their forms flowing and shifting like liquid shadow. Where faces should have been, they had only swirling voids with pinpoints of violet light that served as eyes. Here they come, Kevin warned, forming his absorbed metal into blades extending from his forearms. The door gave way completely, and shadow constructs poured through the opening, a dozen or more flowing into the corridor with unnatural speed. As they approached, the temperature dropped further, frost forming instantly on every surface. Shadow Diamondhead moved to the front of the group, generating a massive crystalline shield that spanned the width of the corridor. Stay behind me. The first wave of constructs crashed against the shield, their shadowy forms partially passing through the solid matter to emerge on the other side. Ben had anticipated this, however, and channeled the Shadow Omnitrix's energy through his crystalline form. The black crystals pulsed with violet light, creating a dimensional barrier that forced the constructs back into fully physical form. Now, he shouted to his teammates. Gwen responded immediately, launching mana discs that sliced through the temporarily solidified constructs, disrupting their cohesion. Kevin charged forward, his metal-coated fists connecting with the weakened entities and dispersing them further. Charmcaster completed the assault, throwing handfuls of the luminous dust that caused the shadow matter to hiss and evaporate upon contact. The first wave was quickly dispatched, but more constructs emerged from the research lab beyond, these moving with more purpose and coordination than their predecessors. They're adapting, Charmcaster warned, readying more magical countermeasures. Learning from each encounter, Ben felt the Shadow Omnitrix's influence providing tactical information, insights into the constructs, nature and weaknesses that he instinctively understood how to exploit. Shadow Diamondhead's form shifted, the crystalline structure reconfiguring to create multiple projecting surfaces that refracted light in specific patterns. Gwen, create the brightest mana flash you can, he instructed. Aim it at my central crystal. Understanding immediately, Gwen gathered mana between her hands, compressing it into a sphere of intense energy before launching it at the modified crystal formation in the center of Ben's chest. The energy struck the black crystal and refracted through the carefully designed pattern, splitting into dozens of beams. Hat struck each shadow construct simultaneously. The result was spectacular. The constructs writhed and disintegrated, their shadowy forms unable to maintain cohesion under the targeted light attack. Within seconds, the corridor was clear, though the temperature remained unnaturally cold. That was impressive, Kevin acknowledged, looking at Ben's Shadow Diamondhead form with new respect. How did you know that would work? The Shadow Omnitrix, Ben explained, the knowledge flowing freely now. It contains information about all shadow species, including their weaknesses. These constructs are extensions of Umbra, but they're still bound by certain dimensional laws. We need to reach the central lab, Gwen reminded them, gesturing to the open doorway ahead. That's where the phase IFT technology is located, and probably where we'll find the source of these constructs. They moved forward carefully, entering the research lab, a massive chamber filled with advanced equipment, much of it damaged or displaced. At the center stood a device that could only be the phase shift technology, a circular platform surrounded by pylons that emitted pulses of blue-white energy. Above the platform, a spatial distortion was forming, the air shimmering and tearing as if reality itself was being peeled away. Most disturbing, however, were the figures suspended around the room, plumber person. Nell held against walls and ceiling by tendrils of shadow matter, their bodies partially phased into the surfaces as if merging with the structure of the facility itself. They appeared unconscious but alive, their life functions presumably slowed by the dimensional distortion affecting them. "They're being prepared for extraction," Charmcaster said quietly, horror evident in her voice despite her clinical description. "Umbra is using them as dimensional anchors, living conduits to help stabilize a permanent breach." Ben felt a surge of anger, both his own and amplified by the shadow Omnitrix's influence. The crystalline structure of his shadow diamond head form pulsed with violet energy, responding to his emotional state. "We need to shut down that device and free these people," he stated. Already moving toward the central platform. "Wait," Gwen cautioned, grabbing his arm. "Look." She pointed to the spatial distortion above the platform, which was growing larger and more defined by the second. Within the shimmering tear, a familiar silhouette was becoming visible, a tall, imposing figure shrouded in darkness with those distinctive violet eyes that matched the energy of the shadow Omnitrix. "Umbra," Ben growled, the name emerging as a resonating vibration through his crystalline form. "He's trying to come through." The altered Omnitrix pulsed strongly, and Ben felt a strange connection forming, as if the device was attempting to communicate directly with the entity emerging from the dimensional breach. Images flashed through his mind, countless worlds consumed by shadow, civilizations transformed by Umbra's influence, and at the center of it all, beings wielding devices similar to the shadow Omnitrix serving as heralds of the Conqueror's arrival. "Ben." Gwen's voice cut through the mental intrusion. "Stay with us." With effort, Ben pushed aside the connection, focusing on the immediate threat. "We need to disrupt the phase shift technology. It's stabilizing the breach." Kevin was already examining the device's control systems. "It's locked into some kind of automated sequence. I can't shut it down conventionally." "Then we do it unconventionally," Ben decided, forming his crystalline hands into sharp blades. "Gwen, Hope, can you contain the dimensional energy if we destroy the physical components?" The two magic users exchanged glances, then nodded in unison. "We can create a containment field," Gwen confirmed. "But it won't hold for long." "It doesn't need to," Ben replied. "Just long enough for us to free these people and get out." As Gwen and Charmcaster began working together to create a magical containment barrier around the spatial distortion, Ben and Kevin approached the phase shift device. The figure within the breach was becoming more distinct, Umbra's form solidifying as the technology continued its work. "On my mark," Ben instructed, positioning himself to strike at one of the critical pylons while Kevin prepared to attack another. 3, 2, 1, now. They struck simultaneously, Ben's crystalline blades slicing through advanced technology while Kevin's metal-enhanced strength crushed delicate components. The effect was immediate. The device sputtered and sparked, the energy flow to the spatial distortion interrupted. Above them, the breach began to destabilize, the edges of the tear fraying as Umbra's partially mate. Realized form was pulled back toward his home dimension. A howl of rage emanated from the breach, the sound unlike anything producible by a human throat, a multi-layered roar that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Vibrating through the very atoms of the room. "Tennyson." Umbra's voice boomed, those violet eyes fixing directly on Ben. "You cannot stop the convergence. The shadow Omnitrix has already begun the process." Ben felt the device pulse against his crystalline form, responding to Umbra's words with a surge of energy that threatened to overwhelm his consciousness. Charmcaster's amulet grew warm against his chest, helping him maintain control. "Watch me," Ben retorted, driving his crystalline blade deeper into the phase shift technology's core. The device exploded in a shower of sparks and quantum energy, the power surge causing the remaining pylons to overload and collapse. Above, the magical containment barrier created by Gwen and Charmcaster strained to control the collapsing breach. Dimensional energy lashing out in wild patterns that scored the walls and ceiling. "The barrier won't hold much longer," Gwen shouted, visibly struggling to maintain her part of the spell. "Get to the personnel," Ben instructed Kevin. We need to free them before the shadow matter dissipates. As Kevin moved to assist the trapped plumbers, Ben faced the collapsing breach directly. Umbra's form was being pulled back, but those violet eyes remained fixed on him with implacable hatred, and something else that disturbed Ben even more: recognition, as if Umbra saw him not as an enemy but as a kindred spirit. You cannot escape your destiny, Tennyson, Umbra's voice echoed, growing fainter as the breach continued to collapse. The Shadow Omnitrix chose you because you have the potential to become what I am. In time, you will understand. I'm nothing like you, Ben insisted, though a part of him, the part influenced by the Shadow Omnitrix, recognized the truth in Umbra's words. There was a connection between them, a resonance that went beyond mere opposition. Umbra's laughter reverberated through the destabilizing breach. We shall see. Until our next meeting, bearer of the shadow. With a final surge of dimensional energy, the breach collapsed completely, the containment barrier dissipating as it no longer had anything to contain. The sudden release of energy sent a shockwave through the chamber, knocking everyone off their feet except Ben, whose crystalline form absorbed the impact. As Umbra vanished, the shadow matter throughout the facility began to dissipate, including the tendrils holding the plumber personnel. Kevin and Charmcaster moved quickly to catch them as they were released, lowering them gently to the floor. They're alive, Charmcaster confirmed after checking the first few, but in some kind of stasis. Their life functions are slowed to near suspension. Can you reverse it? Ben asked, moving to join them as the last of the shadow matter evaporated. Charmcaster examined one of the affected plumbers more closely, her hands glowing with diagnostic magic. Their consciousness has been partially shifted into a dimensional pocket, a side effect of the shadow matter's properties. I can bring them back, but I'll need help. Whatever you need, Gwen offered, already kneeling beside her. Ben stepped back, allowing the two magic users space to work. As he did, he felt the transformation beginning to revert, the Shadow Omnitrix's energy cycling down as it returned him to human form. The transition was smoother than before, suggesting he was gaining more control over the device's functions. As his human consciousness fully reasserted itself, Ben realized how much the Shadow Diamond Head transformation had affected his thinking, making him more tactical, more ruthless in his approach to the threat. While effective, it had also pushed him toward a colder, more calculating mindset that wasn't entirely his own. You okay? Kevin asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Yeah, Ben replied, not entirely convincingly. Just processing everything that happened. Kevin studied him for a moment, then nodded. For what it's worth, you handled that pretty well. The shadow version of Diamond Head is intense. That's one word for it, Ben agreed, glancing at the altered Omnitrix, which had settled back into its balanced green and violet pattern. It amplifies everything, abilities, instincts, even personality traits. Before they could discuss it further, Ester and several of her warriors entered the chamber, having secured the rest of the facility. The perimeter is clear, she reported, taking in the destroyed phase shift technology and the plumber personnel being treated by Gwen and Charmcaster. The shadow constructs dissipated when we closed the breach, Ben explained. They were extensions of Umbra, dependent on his direct influence to maintain form in our dimension. Ester approached one of the affected plumbers, kneeling beside Gwen to examine them more closely. Will they recover? I believe so, Gwen replied, her hands glowing with healing magic. Hope and I are reconnecting their consciousness to their physical forms. It's delicate work, but they should regain full function once the process is complete. Satisfied with this answer, Ester turned to Ben. You transformed. A shadow version of one of your aliens. Ben nodded. Shadow Diamond Head. It was different, more powerful, but also more difficult to control. I saw the footage from our perimeter cameras, Ester said, her expression unreadable. The way you moved, the strategies you employed, they weren't typical of your usual approach. The Shadow Omnitrix influences my thinking when I transform, Ben admitted. It pushes me toward more efficient, more aggressive tactics. Ester considered this information carefully. That could be useful in battle, but dangerous long-term. If it continues to affect your decision-making, how will you know when it's crossed the line from influence to control? It was a perceptive question, and one that Ben had been asking himself. That's why I have people like you around, he replied honestly. To call me out when I start going too far. A small smile touched Ester's lips. Like the old days, when I had to remind you that showing off wasn't the same as saving the day. Exactly, Ben said, returning the smile. Though I'd like to think I've outgrown most of that showboating. Most of it, Ester agreed with a hint of her old playfulness. The moment of connection was brief but genuine. A reminder of the friendship they had shared before their respective responsibilities had pulled them in different directions. Their conversation was interrupted as one of the plumber personnel regained consciousness, sitting up with a gasp as Charmcaster completed the spell to reconnect their mind and body. "Take it easy," Charmcaster advised, supporting the disoriented plumber. "You've been partially phase shifted for several hours. Your perception might be jumbled for a while." "The shadow," the plumber gasped, eyes wide with residual fear. "It was in my mind, searching for something." "What was it looking for?" Ben asked gently, kneeling beside them. The plumber focused on him with difficulty, recognition slowly dawning. "Tennyson. It was looking for information about the Omnitrix. About you specifically." They clutched Ben's arm suddenly. "It knew you by name, asked about your transformations, your limitations." Ben exchanged concerned glances with Gwen and Charmcaster. "Umbra is gathering intelligence," he concluded grimly. "Preparing for our next encounter." "Which means this was just a preliminary incursion," Ester observed, her cetical mind immediately grasping the implications. "A test of our defenses and capabilities. And we just showed him exactly what we can do," Kevin added, gesturing to the destruction around them. Including the shadow transformation. Ben felt the weight of this realization settle on his shoulders. He's playing the long game. This attack on the plumber base wasn't just about acquiring technology. It was about forcing me to use the Shadow Omnitrix so he could assess its integration with me. Which means our victory here might actually have advanced his plans, Charmcaster concluded, her expression troubled. "The question is, what's his next move?" As if in response to her question, the altered Omnitrix pulsed strongly, projecting a holographic display similar to the one Ben had seen in his dream. The image showed a map of Earth with 5 points highlighted, locations where the dimensional fabric was naturally thin, creating potential breach points for Umbra's forces. "The Shadow Omnitrix is providing tactical information," Ben explained, studying the map with surprise. "These must be Umbra's potential targets for the convergence." Ester examined the holographic display with keen interest. "One of those points is directly beneath the Kraho settlement, the magma chamber that provides heat for our people. And another is near the Temple of Ashmedai," Charmcaster noted, hinting to a location in the Nevada desert. "These aren't random points, they're nexus locations where dimensional energy naturally converges." "So we know where he'll strike next," Kevin said, already thinking tactically. "We can prepare defenses at each location." Ben wasn't so certain, or he could be feeding us this information to distract us from his actual target. He looked at the altered Omnitrix with newfound wariness. "We can't forget that this device is connected to him. It might be providing information that serves his purposes as much as ours. Either way, we need to investigate these locations." Gwen decided pragmatically. "If they are potential breach points, we need to understand what makes them vulnerable and how to reinforce the dimensional barriers there." As the team discussed strategy, the remaining plumber personnel were gradually awakened from their stasis, each reporting similar experiences, shadow entities probing their minds for specific information about Earth's defenses, dimensional research, and most concerning, detailed questions about Ben Tennyson and the Omnitrix. Once all the plumbers were conscious and stable, Ester organized their evacuation to the Kraho settlement for medical care and debriefing. The phase shift technology was beyond salvage, its components either destroyed in the battle or rendered useless by the dimensional energy that had surged through them when the breach collapsed. As they prepared to leave the facility, Ben found himself standing alone in the chamber where they had confronted Umbra, staring at the space where the breach had formed. The altered Omnitrix pulsed gently against his wrist, its energy signature subtly different after the encounter, as if it had been recalibrated by proximity to its creator. "You, concerned about the device's loyalties," came Ester's voice as she joined him. It wasn't a question. Ben nodded, not bothering to hide his worry from someone as perceptive as Ester. "It's providing useful information, helping me control the transformations better than before. But there's always this underlying presence. Like it has its own agenda that I can't quite grasp. Ester considered his words carefully before responding. When I first became chief, I inherited my father's advisors, people who had served the Kraho for decades, who knew our ways and traditions better than I did. A half-human raised partially on the surface. Ben listened, curious where she was going with this. I soon realized some of them were providing guidance that served their interests more than the Krahos, she continued. Not out of malice, but because they genuinely believed their vision for our future was the correct one. Her gaze dropped to the altered Omnitrix. The question I had to ask myself was, could I use their knowledge without being manipulated by their agenda? And what did you decide? Ben asked. A smile touched Ester's lips. That wisdom comes from many sources, but decisions must be my own. I listened to all advice, considered all perspectives, but ultimately trusted my own judgment. She nodded toward the device. The Shadow Omnitrix has knowledge you need, power that may be necessary to defeat Umbra. Use it, learn from it, but never forget that your humanity is your greatest strength, not a limitation to be overcome. Her words resonated with Ben, offering a perspective he hadn't considered. The possibility of working with the Shadow Omnitrix's influence rather than constantly fighting against it, while maintaining his own core identity and values. When did you get so wise? He asked with a small smile. Ester's expression softened. Around the same time you got so thoughtful, I imagine. Responsibility has a way of changing us, doesn't it? Before Ben could respond, Kevin appeared at the chamber entrance. Transport's ready. We need to move before the temperature drops any further. The facility's environmental systems are failing without power. They joined the others, boarding the Kraho transports for the journey back to the settlement. The evacuation proceeded smoothly, the combined teams working with the efficiency of professionals accustomed to emergency operations. The injured plumbers were stabilized and made comfortable, while Gwen and Charmcaster continued monitoring them for any lingering effects of the shadow matter exposure. During the journey, Ben sat quietly, processing everything that had happened and the insights Ester had shared. The altered Omnitrix maintained its balanced green and violet pattern, pulsing occasionally as if aware of his contemplation. For the first time since acquiring the Shadow Omnitrix, Ben felt not just the burden of its power but also the potential of a partnership, if he could establish the right boundaries and maintain his own identity in the face of its influence. When they reached the Kraho settlement, the injured plumbers were transferred to the medical facility, a surprisingly advanced operation that combined traditional Kraho healing practices with modern medical technology. Ester explained that they had developed these hybrid approaches out of necessity, adapting surface medicine to address the unique physiological needs of their people. Your settlement has evolved significantly since I was last here, Ben observed as Ester led him, Gwen, Kevin, and Charmcaster to a conference chamber for debriefing. It's impressive what you've accomplished in just a few years. Necessity and vision, Ester replied simply. We needed to create a sustainable future for our people, one that honored our traditions while embracing beneficial innovations from the surface world. She gestured around them. Everything you see is the result of that balance. The conference chamber was equipped with advanced communication technology that allowed them to establish a secure connection with Plumber headquarters. Magistrate Tennyson, Grandpa Max, appeared on the main display, his expression grave as they reported on the events at the research facility. So Umbra made direct contact, Max summarized after hearing their account. And the Shadow Omnitrix is providing tactical information about potential breach points. Quote, information we can't entirely trust, Ben added cautiously. Given its connection to Umbra. Max nodded, understanding the complexity of their situation. Quote, I've reviewed the preliminary data from the facility's sensors before they went offline. The dimensional energy signatures are consistent with previous incursions by extradimensional entities, but at a scale we've never encountered before. Quote, Umbra isn't just any extradimensional entity, Charmcaster interjected. According to the Archimada texts, he's what they call a dimensional apex, a being had exists simultaneously across multiple planes of reality, able to perceive and manipulate the connections between them. Which explains his interest in the phase shift technology, Gwen concluded. It would enhance his natural abilities, allowing him to create more stable breaches between dimensions. And the Shadow Omnitrix? Max asked, his concern evident even through the video feed. What's its role in all this? Ben glanced down at the device, which pulsed gently as if aware it was the topic of discussion. It's a key of sorts. It allows the wielder to access and manipulate dimensional boundaries in ways similar to Umbra himself, but on a smaller scale. When Ben transformed into Shadow Diamondhead, Kevin added, he was able to interact with the shadow constructs on their end terms, forcing them into physical form when they tried to phase through his defenses. Max processed this information with the careful consideration of a veteran plumber. So the Shadow Omnitrix gives you an advantage against Umbra's forces, but at the risk of being influenced by its connection to him. That's about the size of it, Ben confirmed. Though I'm getting better at managing the influence during transformations. With help, Charmcaster reminded him, glancing pointedly at the amulet still hanging around his neck beneath his shirt. Max sighed, the weight of leadership evident in his expression. We need more information about these potential breach points the Shadow Omnitrix has identified. I'm dispatching plumber teams to establish monitoring stations at each location, I want your team to investigate the one near the Temple of Ashmedai first. If it's a natural nexus point as Hope suggests, it might give us insight into how Umbra selects his targets. We'll head there immediately, Gwen confirmed. The transport beacon should work for our return journey. One more thing, Max added, his expression softening slightly as he addressed his grandson directly. Ben, I'm assigning a specialist to work with you on controlling the Shadow Omnitrix's influence. Professor Paradox recommended her specifically, says she has unique insight into dimensional technologies. Ben raised an eyebrow in surprise. Paradox is involved. That's either very reassuring or extremely concerning. A ghost of a smile touched Max's lips. With Paradox, usually both. The specialist's name is Dr. Elena Validus. She'll meet you at the temple tomorrow. Ben exchanged startled glances with Gwen at the familiar name. Elena Validus had been a childhood friend who later became entangled with dangerous nanite technology. Their last encounter had been years ago, and under difficult circumstances. Elena, Ben questioned. I didn't know she was working with the plumbers. She isn't, officially, Max clarified. She's been doing independent research on cross-dimensional technology at a facility in Quantum Harbor. Paradox says her work is particularly relevant to your current situation. Before Ben could ask further questions, the communication system emitted a warning tone, indicating security protocols were being activated. We're experiencing interference, Max reported, his image beginning to break up. Likely Umbra testing our communications infrastructure. I'll have Drive Validus contact you directly with the details of her arrival. His expression grew serious once more. Be careful, all of you. If Umbra was willing to reveal himself directly, it means he's confident in his plans. The transmission ended, leaving the team to consider this new development in silence for a moment. Elena Validus, Gwen finally said, voicing the concern they all felt. Are we sure that's wise, given her history with the nanites? Paradox wouldn't have recommended her without reason, Ben pointed out. Though he shared Gwen's reservations. And if she's been researching dimensional technology, her expertise could be valuable. I'm more concerned about these breach points. Kevin interjected pragmatically. If Umbra is targeting natural dimensional weak spots, we need to understand why those specific locations are vulnerable. Esther, who had been listening quietly, activated the chamber's holographic display to show the 5 locations the Shadow Omnitrix had identified. There's a pattern here, she observed, highlighting the geographical distribution. A CH point corresponds to a major ley line convergence, natural channels of Earth's electromagnetic field that certain cultures have mapped for centuries. Charmcaster stepped forward, her expression brightening with recognition. She's right. These aren't just random weak spots, they're natural energy nexuses where the veil between dimensions is thinnest. She turned to Ben. The Shadow Omnitrix didn't choose these locations. It identified existing vulnerabilities that Umbra would naturally target. Which means the information it provided is legitimate, Ben concluded, feeling a small measure of relief. At least in this case. We should still proceed with caution, Gwen advised. Just because the locations are accurate doesn't mean Umbra isn't trying to manipulate our response to them. Ben nodded in agreement, then turned to Esther. What about the breach point beneath your settlement? If Umbra targets that location, your people will be in immediate danger. Ester's expression was resolute. We've lived with dimensional instability in our volcanic home for generations. Now that we know the specific vulnerability, we can take precautions. She activated another display showing the settlement's defensive systems. I'll have our engineers reconfigure the geothermal regulators to stabilize the dimensional boundary. It won't prevent a determined breach, but it will provide warning and buy us time to evacuate if necessary. We can help with that, Charmcaster offered unexpectedly. There are Archimata warding techniques specifically designed for volcanic regions where dimensional boundaries are naturally thin. I can teach your people how to implement them. Surprise flickered across Ester's features, followed by grateful acknowledgement. That would be most appreciated, Ms. Silverman. The formal exchange between the two women, each leaders in their own right, established a new level of cooperation that Ben found encouraging. If they were to effectively counter Umbra's plans, they would need allies from various backgrounds and disciplines working together. We should prepare to return to the temple, Gwen suggested, checking the time. If Dr. Validus is arriving tomorrow, we need to be ready. As they made preparations for departure, Ben found himself drawn into a private conversation with Ester, who pulled him aside in the corridor outside the conference chamber. Ben, she began, her tone more personal than the professional demeanor she had maintained throughout the operation. What happened at the facility? Your transformation, the direct confrontation with Umbra. It confirmed something I suspected when you first arrived. What's that? He asked, curious about her insight. You're at a crossroads, she said simply. The Shadow Omnitrix isn't just a tool or a weapon. It's a catalyst for your own evolution. The question isn't whether you can control its power, but whether you can integrate it without losing what makes you Ben Tennyson. Her perception was startlingly accurate, cutting to the heart of his internal struggle. And what makes me Ben Tennyson, in your expert opinion? He asked, attempting to lighten the moment with a touch of his old humor. Ester wasn't diverted. Your compassion, she replied without hesitation. Your willingness to see the best in others, even former enemies. Her gaze briefly flicked toward the Co-Ference chamber where Charmcaster was working with Gwen on transportation preparations. Your ability to inspire others to be better than they thought possible. She reached out, her hand hovering near the altered Omnitrix without quite touching it. Don't let this device change those qualities, Ben. The universe has plenty of power. What it needs are people who wield that power with wisdom and heart. The sincerity in her voice affected Ben more deeply than he expected. This was a different Ester than the playful, sometimes impulsive young woman he had known. This was a leader who understood the burden of power and the isolation it could bring. I'll try, he promised, meaning it. Though a little help from friends who aren't afraid to call me out when I'm being an idiot wouldn't hurt. A genuine smile broke through Ester's serious demeanor. That, at least, is something I've always excelled at. The smile faded slightly as she added, when this is over, when Umbra is defeated and the Shadow Omnitrix is under control, perhaps we could. She trailed off, seemingly uncertain how to articulate what she wanted to say. Have dinner, Ben suggested, surprised by his own boldness. Quote, catch up properly without interdimensional conquerors interrupting. The smile returned, warming her eyes. I'd like that. Their moment was interrupted as Kevin appeared at the end of the corridor. Transport's ready. Gwen's got the beacon calibrated for the return jump. Ben nodded acknowledgement, then turned back to Ester. Keep your people safe. We'll let you know what we find at the temple nexus point. I'll hold you to that, she replied, professional demeanor returning though her eyes retained their warmth. The Kraho stand ready to assist if Umbra makes another move. This threat concerns all of Earth, not just the surface dwellers. They rejoined the others in the main chamber of the settlement, where Gwen had prepared the transport beacon for activation. The Kraho officials gathered to bid farewell to their chief's guests, the formal ceremony brief but respectful, an acknowledgement of the alliance that had been strengthened through shared adversity. As Kevin activated the beacon, creating the swirling portal that would return them to the Temple of Ashmedai, Ben caught Ester watching him with an expression that combined concern, pride, and something else he couldn't quite identify. Perhaps a recognition of the parallel paths their lives had taken, leading them both to positions of responsibility neither had anticipated in their younger days. The portal engulfed them, folding space around the team as they were transported across thousands of miles in an instant. Ben's last glimpse of the Kraho settlement was Ester standing tall among her people, every inch he leader she had become, and a reminder of the kind of leader he aspired to be, Shadow Omnitrix or not. As they materialized in the main chamber of the temple, the altered device pulsed against his wrist, not the aggressive, demanding pulse of earlier encounters, but a steadier rhythm that felt almost synchronous with his own heartbeat. Whether this represented progress in their integration or subtle form of influence remained to be seen, but for the first time since acquiring the Shadow Omnitrix, Ben felt a measure of hope that mastery might be possible without sacrifice of his essential self. The challenge ahead remained daunting. Umbra's resources vast, his understanding of dimensional mechanics superior, his patience evidently limitless. But as Ben looked around at his assembled team, Gwen with her magical expertise, Kevin with his practical skills and unwavering loyalty, Charmcaster with her arcane knowledge and surprising capacity for growth, he knew they weren't facing this threat alone. And somewhere in the Arctic, a Kraho chief was preparing her people to stand alongside them when the moment of truth arrived, a reminder that strength came in many forms, and that true power lay not in the abilities one possessed, but in how one chose to use them. The altered Omnitrix pulsed once more, as if in agreement with this philosophy. Perhaps, Ben thought, that was the Saint step toward true mastery, finding the common ground between wielder and weapon, human and alien, light and shadow. A balance that honored both without surrendering to either. Only time would tell if such balance was achievable, or if the darkness of the Shadow Omnitrix would ultimately prove too seductive to resist. For now, the choice remained his to make, one transformation at a time. Chapter 2 End. The End. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.